Hello, friends. Welcome. Oh my gosh, what's wrong with LML's camera? It's off center. Well, that's actually because I have a guest. It's Grey Waste Tim. Say hello, Grey Waste Tim.
Hello, Grey Waste Tim.
Oh, you got me. Anyways, hey folks, it is Grey Waste Tim. He's back. Great, the star of the Crypts of Winterfell stream, Grey Waste Tim. How's it going?
I think we're getting feedback from the mic.
Well, that could be it. Check and see if you have a YouTube window open with this stream in it. You just need to mute that.
Whoops, I had the YouTube window open. I was seeing what people were saying in the chat before.
It's okay, Tim. It's only your second time on. You can click the pop out chat button. It makes it much easier. In the upper right corner of the chat is a little 3 dots. You click that, do the pop out chat, and you can put the chat window wherever you want. Hide the YouTube window. Yes. So, folks, we are, of course, thrilled to have Tim back on. He was a great contributor on our Crypts of Winterfell stream. If you have not checked that out, it had been a good 3 years since I had talked about the Crypts. So we went back and ripped it open with all kinds of crazy theories. That was a great stream. And thanks again, Tim, for joining me. The cash is rolling in from that one. It's great. Well, trickling. It's coming. Anyways, we do appreciate you. And today we've got a cool topic, folks. I changed this up. You may be expecting a War for the Dawn 2.0 stream. The one I had planned was going to be the symbolic foreshadowing one. So we're going to look at Tower of Joy fight and other symbolic fights or fight scenes that are laden with symbolism that seem to be foreshadowing the War for the Dawn stuff. I just couldn't wrap my brain around it, to be honest. I've been working on this Daenerys video, basically my ultimate who is the real Daenerys character analysis video. And so I've been thinking just more in the character analysis mode. And I just couldn't make the symbolism happen in Tim. It was weird feeling for me. But I decided to do a character analysis based stream. And so what we're going to do is we're going to run through the primary hardened conflict for all the major characters and just sort of sketch out and flesh out what they want and what is opposing them. And just to give a little background, there's a William Faulkner quote. Basically, it goes something along the lines of the only thing worth writing about is the heart in conflict, human heart in conflict. And George has bandied that quote about quite often. It seems to be one of his North Stars, his guiding principles of writing. And the way it works is pretty simple. People are moved by their desires. Anyone who's watched the show Dark on Netflix is familiar with some of these ideas, but people are really driven by what they want. And even if they're not aware of what they want, sometimes their true desires are generally what pulls and motivates people. And the things that get in the way of achieving those desires, or we might say becoming the person that somebody wants to become, that is the opposition. That's where the conflict comes in. And so what George is saying is that whether you want to write about fantasy or science fiction or historical fiction or anything like that, what it comes down to is what do the characters want, what is opposing their goals, and the story generally arises from that conflict. So the heart in conflict is what moves the characters. And it becomes quickly apparent when you start going through the characters and thinking about what do they want and what is stopping them from what they want. And Tim, I got to tell you, going through all the characters yesterday and doing the prep for this, I came up with some opinions that surprised me. Like I surprised myself with my takes once I oriented myself from that person's perspective and thought about what do they want. So I might have a couple of hot takes. I definitely should have some things to discuss, but I haven't done a ton of notes, guys. The idea was to foster a discussion here, both with Mr. Tim to my left and with you, the chat. So I will leave it up to you guys to, first of all, call out what character you'd like to do next. I've got all the characters here, so we can go in any order. It doesn't really matter. And also once we start a character, I'm going to start by asking, well, what does this person want? So I've got a little bit of an idea of what I think it is, but this is not something that I've over-researched, so I'm not 100% sure of myself on some of these. Some of these might need refining. you guys might be able to, or Tim might be able to, take this further. So I've got some notes basically just to get the thing started. So, for example, Daenerys, I'm working on the Daenerys episode, and I've talked about Daenerys endlessly on this channel, or not endlessly, but quite a bit. So we all kind of know what her heart and conflict is. So, for example, what she really wants, what we think she wants. If you just watch the show, you think, oh, what does Dany want? She wants the Iron Throne. Actually, if you go back to her first chapters, you find that what she wants is a sense of safety, home, and family. And this is symbolized by the house with the red door. And in her first chapters, especially, she's only thinking about the house with the red door. She looks out like she's being sold off to Khal Drogo in marriage. She's looking out the window at the poor kids playing in the street. Man, I wish I could just play with them, because Dany never had a childhood. So what you really figure out is that what Dany wants is home and safety, and that the gap, the inability to provide those things for herself turns into a quest to provide those things to all of her people. That's the point of her calling all of her people her children. She's trying to give them the safety and protection that she did not have, because she has the dragons, she has the power to do it. That's Dany's true desire. However, Viserys' dream of conquering Westeros and retaking, the Iron Throne for House Targaryen has been adopted by Dany. And this has set up this conflict of where she wants to protect people, she wants to be a good ruler, she wants to be the great mother, but she also thinks that she wants to retake Westeros and the Iron Throne with dragons. Now, if Dany tries to retake the Iron Throne, I don't think she'll go Hitler Dany like on the show, but there will be bloodshed and misery. The dragons are horrible weapons of war if used against humans. We'll see thousands of people being burned alive. And the thing is that even the people that oppose Dany in Westeros are people that Dany still wants to make her subjects. She doesn't really want to burn whole armies of Lannisters or anybody else. That she wants to rule Westeros. She wants to make Westeros a beautiful and happy kingdom for her people. So this is her conflict. And of course, I would suggest that the only way she can resolve that conflict is by letting go of the Iron Throne quest in favor of protecting the realm. Very much like what Stannis did. And I'm going to talk about this in the video. But Stannis, of course, was at first fixated on claiming the throne as his by rights. But then he realizes, with Davos's help on that letter from the Watch, that if he wants to be king, he needs to go north and protect the realm. Yeah. And this is the same thing that Dany is going to be faced with. Go ahead. Your thoughts, Tim.
Well, yeah, because Stannis does have his moment of realization where he realizes, I'm putting the cart before the horse. And Dany, while she's in Meereen and she's trying to do good by the people, she's also realizing like how hard the game is played, because some things that you can't just immediately get the results you want. And she's learning that, like, having to make compromises, but also having to make compromises with truly horrible people. Because how do you compromise with slavery? And it's like is it a gradual decline? Because the thing is that as much as she wants to just try and overhaul a system like that, just the drop of a hat, it has real world ramifications. And we see that in the story, because what Dany doesn't know is that her efforts in Meereen do have far reaching consequences that she cannot see, because what's happening north of the wall, we have wildlings being taken by slavers because there is basically a supply chain shortage of slaves. But that's what Dany doesn't see, is like, this isn't stopping slavery. It's just causing slavers in the free cities to look for new sources. And when the wildlings are desperate to get as far south or just as far away from the wall as they can to escape the White Walkers, it's sending them into a whole new means of slavery, because they're becoming these new substitute slaves that the slave cities are picking up to make up for what's happening in Slaver's Bay, the supply chain not coming out of there.
Well, the other side of that coin, though, is that she's also, that quote that I read a couple weeks ago it's a Volantene merchant talking to Tyrion. And he's talking about how the slaves are growing restless here in Volantis because they see this shining queen from afar, this breaker of chains. And they hear the R'hllorys, of course, preaching about how Dany is Azor High Reborn and all this stuff. So,
And I'm totally on the Volantis is gonna burn bandwagon for that one.
Yeah, the inner city at least, because it's just all too convenient. You've got all the richest slave masters in the world gathered inside of fused stone walls, and all of their slaves and servants are basically connected to a network that has control over them and is pro Dany. So you can easily see the situation where the slaves are going to leave. But my point in addressing what you were saying is that anytime you disrupt a corrupt system, there's layers to it. There's ripple effects. Doesn't mean that disrupting the corrupt system was wrong. It means that it takes more than one victory to win a war against something like an entire slave economy. So, for example, she's doing work in Slaver's Bay. We don't know how that's going to be resolved. She's going to visit Volantis. There's the whole question of Pentos, which is not a slave city, but their merchants are definitely connected to the slave economy. So by the time Dany gets to Westeros, we'll have to see just how much the system has been disrupted and what's been replaced. But something that occurred to me, Tim, during the course of my research is that one of the tragedies of Dany's character is that she wants to plant trees and build a happy kingdom and stuff. But really, I think she's more of the cleansing fire is the role that she's got to play. That's why she's given the dragons. She might not be around to see the dream of spring, quote unquote, but she'll help pave the way for it by using her dragons against the others, winning the long night. So I think that's what Quaid is getting at when she's like, dragons don't plant trees. Dany, of course, does plant trees. She does it twice in Base Teloro and in Meereen. But again, because of the timing of circumstances and what Dany's role is as the only dragon lord in the world, it's just not really the time for planting trees and building a new city yet. We've got to save the world. And then in the springtime comes the time to plant trees and stuff. Dany may not be around for that. And that, I think, is one of the tragedies of her character, essentially, because she wants to in her heart. But the thing is that, again, the heart and conflict for her is this idea of taking the throne versus caring for people. And ultimately, I'm pretty confident that she'll realize, just as Stannis did, the way to sort of protect everyone, to be the great mother, is to throw herself into the teeth of the battle. So,
and like you said, but Dany is the only dragon lord left, so she has nobody to kind of mentor her on the best ways of go about this. She has to learn as she goes. Like, she has no way of knowing how to tame Drogon. Like, it's a whole work in progress.
yes, it is. Fortunately, Marwyn the Mage is coming, and Dragonhorn and Tyrion and all kinds of crap.
Yeah, but one thing that I will say about that is Marwyn will come and he'll have helpful advice and hopefully have some books and some scrolls and told with him. But there's the idea of, okay, well, you read it and doing it, reading about something and actually pulling it off, two completely different scenarios.
Well, she's already done the harder thing, which was to grab a whip, face down Drogon in the pit, dodge his fire, and then make him submit. So she's already already done the field work there. So that was Daenerys. That's by way of example. So guys, again, I've got all of the POV characters and some of the other non-POV but important characters listed here. We can go in any order, but if you would like to dictate the order, you can use the PayPal function or the paypal.me mythical astronomy address, which is right below me here, or you can use the super chat function inside of YouTube. Either way, and we will do your character of choice. You can make a point about the character and get it started that way. I did get a PayPal before the stream. Oh, it's from Grey Waste Tim. Actually, before I invited him on the stream, and no, sending me a PayPal is not how you get invited on the stream. It's total coincidence. I changed my mind on the stream and was thinking, I should invite somebody on, and we were chatting. In any case, Tim, your question was about Sansa and Littlefinger and Elia. Let's go ahead and do Sansa, and then we'll tackle your question here. How about that?
Okay.
So Sansa's an interesting character, as I was thinking about her yesterday. She also her chapters are titled Elaine in A Feast for Crows Through the Winds of Winter. So she's got an identity shift or a crisis going on, obviously. But what I came up with when I was thinking about what does Sansa want, she's one of the characters whose idea of success is very much defined by the medieval society that she lives in. So you could say, oh, well, she wants to be a fancy lady. She wants to be a lady of the court, a queen, whatever, a princess. You know, you could sort of characterize it in the childlike way that she sort of thinks about it. But essentially, what I tried to make myself do was to get beneath the surface here and think about what they really want. So what Sansa really wants is to have success in the context of medieval society. She wants to be a successful lady of the house, a queen or a Lady Stark, whatever it is. And she also, I think her desire in the sense of like what fulfills her, it's really caretaking, showing kindness, and showing empathy. I tried to think about what the characters do when they're sort of hard pressed and they're going on instinct. I think of the moment during the Battle of the Blackwater when everybody, Sansa and Cersei, are in the sort of waiting room with the women and children, and the battle's going on outside. Cersei's getting drunk and kind of, edgy in Cersei fashion. Of course, it is Sansa who addresses the need of everyone who's afraid, and she starts talking to people. I think she leads a song. I don't know what she does, a few things, but essentially she comforts and provides leadership. And you also see her do that in small moments with other characters like the Hound. And I think that essentially that is what fulfills her. And it goes along with her idea of success in a medieval society as being the proper lady, the proper queen. And so that is what I think Sansa wants. And the thing that's standing in the way of that would be her own naivete, which is partly her parents to blame for kind of sheltering her, not really raised like Marjorie's. Many people made that comparison. Marjorie's only a couple years older than Sansa. She's way more advanced and prepared for court politics. That's on her parents versus Sansa's parents. Sansa, so naivete, inexperience. And then she also has a bunch of trauma once, after her dad is murdered and right in front of her, and then she's abused by Joffrey. That's obvious. And then she's suffering from disillusionment because of that. Her dream of being a queen and of what queens and kings are like, it was very rose-colored glasses, and it's been shattered and shattered and shattered again. Mm-hmm. So she has all these bad examples to look up to, people like Joffrey, Queen Cersei, and now Littlefinger. So what do you think of that as far as what Sansa wants and what is standing in the way?
I think like Sansa's one of those characters who kind of like stumbled out the gates. And I think like that's the impression a lot of people get from the first book, because first book Sansa is just like, God, like it's some of the most annoying stuff you can think of because of how she is, and because we're left with the idea of her actions are what lead to her father's death. But I think that in the time since then, in the books that followed the first book, she's done a lot of character growth. She's developed that huge sense, that huge bit of empathy towards all these other characters, and you can tell like she's devastated over what happened, and the fact that she has to live with that. When I think of like current Sansa, where she is right now as Elaine versus like when we first meet her character in the first book, it's like it's almost two completely different characters in her growth. It makes me think of like so when I was in school, when I was in high school, we had this project when I was 17. My English teacher had us do this project where we wrote a letter to ourselves, and then she hung on to those for 4 years and then mailed it back to us when we graduated college. So 21-year-old me read a letter from 17-year-old me.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, wow, I was a fucking idiot.
I was about to say cringe city, right?
Now I'm 33 and I look back on 21-year-old me and I go, that guy was also an idiot.
Well, so that, Tim, is, first of all, it's a sign of success. It means you are getting older, getting wiser. Basically, the process of acquiring wisdom could almost be described as just realizing how little you used to know or that you know currently. So That's actually a good sign when you can look back at your younger self and be like, oh man, I've come a long way since then.
But that's why, like, what makes Sansa a good character is because as she's learning to play the game, she's learning from Littlefinger, who, despite being one of the slimiest people, at least as far as the game goes, that's actually a pretty good teacher to have. Like, not to like talk up Littlefinger, but it is like in surviving in this world, like that is someone to actually look to and see, like, well, how's he succeeding, and see what mechanisms he's using. But to do that, but also retain that empathy. That's what's going to make sense. What's going to drive Sansa going forward.
Well, so there you go. Now we've redefined the conflict then, because George has very intentionally given her two people that are effective politically to a certain extent. Littlefinger more than Cersei, but even Cersei is still effective politically, especially in the early books, but who lack morality, obviously, not only kindness, but just a basic moral compass. So you can see Sansa's desire to be a successful lady of the court in Westeros society, which basically means a successful player of the Game of Thrones, a successful politician, is going to be in conflict with her basic values of caretaking, empathy, and kindness. So yes, you can see how that kind of conflict is going to pull a character through a story. And you can see how this is going to be, it gives them ways to grow and obstacles to overcome. And I think there are overlapping themes with some of the other characters. It's a little bit similar to Dany in the sense that she's also a caretaker who is very empathetic to people, having suffered herself, and has to balance that with the necessities, quote unquote, of being a ruler and going to war and all the rest of it. So there's definitely some pretty interesting comparisons between Sansa and Dany. And I think they will have a lot in common whenever they get to talking, to whatever extent that happens. Thinking, of course, about the plot line on the show where they're basically cat fighting and subtweeting each other or whatever is kind of lame, but.
No, I think when Dany and Sansa do meet, they are going to see that they have a similar sense of ideals, that they want the same things, and I think they're both going to have, they're both going to want what's best for Jon as well. Like, I don't see Dany, even if Dany does learn the truth about Jon, the idea of her wanting to undermine him or to ask him to renounce that, or to not pull forward, like, that's not the Dany I see in the book. She probably will be upset, just like how she's also might be a bit upset to hear about Fagon, but she also has this, like how we said, she has this longing for family that might actually supersede her claims to the throne, because it'd be like, yeah, they're ahead of me, but hey, family, that's actually what I wanted.
Yeah, it's really important. And I think also the idea that Fagon's going to be a popular king is further undermining the idea that Dany is justified in taking the throne. And that's the whole point, is that you're not really justified in conquering the kingdom just for the sake of you think you should be the one. Like, that's not just reason to go to war. So yeah, I think that's interesting. But getting back to Sansa, a couple of interesting comments. Minty said that Sansa is perhaps the most realistic character. And I think I see what you mean there, because she's, a lot of times you read a fantasy story and it's like the protagonists have all this power, and most people don't have magic power. Most of us aren't rulers of large families or anything like that. And so oftentimes the world does feel big and outside of our control. And it's really mostly about how you can respond to the things that are swirling around you, especially as a young person. Sansa, at her age and the way that she's essentially abandoned by circumstances to the hands of the Lannisters for 2 books, and then now to Littlefinger's hands, like, it really is a matter of not only surviving, but holding on to and figuring out who she really is through that struggle to survive. And Carl added that in order for her to grow or change into something awesome, she has to start from somewhere different than that, or else there's no real arc. And so essentially, we start off, that's why Sansa starts off with these fairy tale dreams And then George makes a point of shattering them so emphatically. This is the real beginning of Sansa's arc, is this place of disillusionment, of seeing how cruel the kings and queens can be. And then it's like, oh, do I have to be like Cersei in order to be successful in medieval society, which is essentially her desire? So we really are hoping that Sansa can hold on to her moral compass through all of this stuff and still somehow absorb some of the tactics and the lessons of the game that she eventually will have to play. So it's shaping up to be a pretty interesting arc going forward, even as some of her chapters have been slow in the past. I'm very much looking forward to her chapters in the next books.
Oh, me too. I'm definitely interested to see how Littlefinger's price gouging goes.
So your Sansa question, would you want to go ahead and rephrase it?
Okay, yeah. So my Sansa question was, so I was watching the Ask About Your Theory stream, and there was the idea that Sansa, because her direwolf died so early in the story, she never had a chance to really embrace any skin changer powers. But George has said that all the Stark children have skin changer powers, and the big theory is that if Sansa's skin changes something, it's probably going to be birds, and because of all the little bird imagery associated with her. But when we think little birds, like for me, like I immediately jump over to Varys, because Varys's informants are his little birds. And if we're going with this idea that Littlefinger's downfall is going to come at the hands of Sansa, remember that before that, who was Littlefinger's like biggest rival? Was Varys. Varys and Littlefinger were like the original odd couple. And so
so they both have a little bird. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Both little birds are children. That's interesting. I wonder, so Varys uses his little birds to kill. Littlefinger used Sansa to kill Joffrey via way of the hairnet plot with the Queen of Thorns. I wonder if we're ever going to see any of Varys's children rise up against him in the way that we expect Sansa to rise up against Littlefinger, now that you've made that comparison.
Yeah. But the other one I was also bring up is that Varys' story is leading to his Project King, which is Fagon. And there's been ideas of like different marriage alliances that Fagon might make. We have the obvious Arya and Martell that he will probably muck up by having a tryst with Elia Sand. But another name that's been thrown around is as a possible marriage option for him is Sansa. And
Definitely.
as far as I know, I don't think Littlefinger knows about Fagon. So when Fagon shows up and Littlefinger catches wind of him, and since we already know, like, Harry the Heir is not long for this world, like he's
potentially
Littlefinger might try and pivot Sansa over to Fagon, not knowing that Fagon is Varys's little creature. And so I was thinking maybe Sansa and Varys, through a connection from Fagon, might see this as, hey, this is the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and it might actually be a joint effort of Varys and Sansa that leads to Littlefinger's downfall.
You know, the more you talk about that, the more that seems like an interesting direction for George to go. Fagon, Sansa, potential, like even just them talking about arranging a marriage alliance, because you'd have to send emissaries back and forth to even just propose it or whatever. You can see, so if Sansa Stark comes out as Stark and ruler of, okay, so here's what it would be. All right. Peter would first marry so Sweet Robin gets knocked off first, which has been telegraphed. Then Harry the Heir comes out as the heir of the Vale. Sansa is revealed as Sansa Stark. This is what Peter wants to do, to marry Sansa to Harry the Heir and rule through them for a couple years, probably then kill Harry the Heir and become the rule, and then marry Sansa. The thing is that they could easily, like, in order for Sansa to be a good match to Fagon, she needs to be ruling over those kingdoms. So this would have to be after marrying Harry, but then Harry has to die. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to be married to Fagon. Like, I don't think Fagon would marry Sansa just for a claim to the north that she doesn't actually hold. Right?
Yeah.
So Be a couple steps down the line, but that's interesting. Having Varys and Littlefinger on the other side of the two puppet rulers.
That's the thing that's when we think of like the whole Great Northern Conspiracy, one of the problems with that is that everyone's backing a different Stark, and that's where I see like when the Stark children realign, for them it's probably not going to be who. The most important thing for them is not going to be who is going to be the Lord of Winterfell. What's going to be most important to them is we're all back together after being separated for years. And then they're all going to have like these different plotters behind them, though, trying to like force their hand on who's going to be Lord. Well, really, that's not going to be what's important to them. And that's actually going to be when we think with the heart and conflict. The conflict, well, that will be the Stark children just wanting to be a family again, but the conflict of other northern lords trying to press claims through them.
Yeah, I do. It does seem to be something that's being set up for sure. Some people might back Resurrected Jon. Obviously, the Wyman faction is trying to get Rickon for that reason. And then you've got Sansa, and the Boltons are trying to use fake Arya for their claims. So, yeah. Then real Arya is going to come back. So, yeah, it could be a little political mess there for a little while longer until winter falls. So let's go to Will. Let's start with, okay, so the prologue of A Game of Thrones is from the perspective of Will, but it's really about Waymar. So I went ahead and defined both of these guys. So Will's pretty simple. He wants to stay alive. He's scared and cold and 9 days out from the wall. And as the woods grows colder and the Rangers begin to pick up on the presence of the others and the unnatural cold and the empty wood, Will wants to go home. And Waymar keeps ordering him on, go explore this, climb the tree, go see this. And that's basically, so Will is essentially, he wants to stay alive. Now, the opposition to him staying alive is that he's a brother of the Night's Watch and he is sworn to do his duty. And Waymar is actually correct in having the instinct to follow out and see what this mystery is about. He's right that the wildlings didn't just move and that there was something that they needed to find out there. So Will, his desire to stay alive, the thing resisting it is his duty as a Night's Watchman to go forward into this dangerous situation. Do you think I got that right or what?
Oh, yeah.
Very good. And then as far as Waymar, the prologue is really about Waymar, of course. What would you say that Waymar's desire is?
I think Waymar's desire was to kind of build a name for himself. Because if I remember correctly, the reason Waymar Royce is even at the wall is because he was a younger son who was so far down the line of succession, he never stood a chance of,
that's right. Yeah.
of inheriting lands. But him being the Vale, and they still some families in the Vale still have those northern sensibilities of how joining the wall, it's actually still a respectable position.
That's right.
And I do think that and because we do see that is that Waymar Royce is leading some men who, if the wall was truly egalitarian, where you came from and your lordships and titles didn't matter, Waymar Royce shouldn't be in charge to begin with. He should be a junior to the Rangers that he's with.
That's true. So there is, and that's part of the conflict that's set up there. So the reason why that George gives us that through Will's POV and not Waymar's, even though it's all about Waymar. Waymar is the central character of the prologue. Absolutely. The reason why it's told through Will's eyes, I think, is so that Waymar can be set up as this cocky, entitled character. But then when you step back and analyze the action, you see that he was actually the one who was right and the one who was doing his duty. And the other two Rangers were actually coming up cowardly when they needed to go on further. So Waymar actually has the right idea, but he's not perfect either. He is entitled and he is cocky. And so the way that he talks to his other Rangers is condescending, and it's not very good leadership. So you can see that this is how George the whole point of having gray characters and imperfect characters is to set up these conflicts, because no real person is actually perfect. So even though Waymar has the right idea, he's not communicating well. And so there's this dysfunction within his team. So this is kind of the story of the prologue. Waymar, yeah, exactly, desires to prove himself. He wants to be honorable. He wants to honor his family's name. He wants to carve his name out. But he wants to do that by being a brave ranger of the watch, because that means something to him. So it's not an entirely vain desire. So we're going to talk a lot. Hang on. We're going to talk about a lot of people who want to prove themselves, prove their worthiness in various ways, but it can mean different things. So for Waymar, he's trying to prove himself by being courageous and bold in the face of the ultimate enemy, who he believes is the other. So I think that's it's pretty bold. And of course, the even Will has to admit that when Waymar raises his sword and faces the others, that he was a man of the watch then and no longer a boy. So you see that grudging respect come even from Will. So this is how you do it. Just as a writer, you have to set up these conflicts. Every character needs a conflict, because that drives their dialogue. It makes it so that the characters have a consistent feel. Will and Garrett are saying the same kinds of things. Waymar is saying the same kinds of things all through the chapter. So they feel like people with a real personality. And all of that comes from defining the character conflict. And that's why George has said you really can't write about a character until he knows what their conflict is. Got that? Yeah? Yeah? Mm-hmm. Everybody on the same page there?
Yeah.
So then the next chapter we get is Mr. Bran Stark. So Bran, he's a kid when the story starts off. So he's got a childlike dream. He wants to be a knight. It's equivalent of wanting to be a fireman or, an Air Force pilot if you're 7 or 5 or whatever it is. 8-year-old boy, I guess. So he wants to be a knight. And of course, the initial conflict is that he's paralyzed. He loses his mobility, so he can't be a knight. So this is the cause of his depression. And it's basically these broken dreams right from the beginning. It's kind of similar to Sansa. Sansa wants to be a lady of the court. That dream is shattered because her idea of being a lady doesn't exist. Bran wants to be a knight. That dream is completely shattered. He can't be a knight at all. So he's got to figure out what to do. But of course, the thing about Bran is that he is already both curious about the world and kind of aloof and removed. He loves to climb all over the castle where no one else goes. So he's kind of like, I relate to that a little bit. When I was a kid, I did like to play outside a lot, but I also spent a lot of time in my room just building Lego castles and having wars with Transformers and G.I. Joes. I go for hours, doing that. Anyone who has ADHD will relate to that, I guess. But so Bran is kind of set up to be the sort of person that can handle the path that he's going on, where he is separate and removed from everyone. But his broken dreams are essentially the opposition of his desire. But let me ask you, Tim, what do you think is underneath that desire to be a knight? Like, what would you say is the real desire underneath that?
For Bran's, I think Bran is just I don't think he truly knows what he really wants because of how young he is. He hasn't had a chance to experience what other goals he could have, what other careers or just like life situations that he can be in. He's fixated on the idea of being a knight, of being a member of the Kingsguard because of the stories he's heard and this childlike wonder and excitement about that. And then it just has that ripped away from him so early. And because he never even thought about what other options he might have had, he's left in this idea of, well, now it's nothing. I have nothing going forward, until he starts having these dreams. But then even when he does eventually meet Bloodraven, when he eventually gets north and he realizes like this isn't going to be the magic wizard who's going to restore my legs, I'm still not going to get the things that I want. So really, what am I going to have? And Bloodraven's like, well, you won't walk, but you will fly. Now we've yet to really see what exactly that's going to entail, because with every passing book, we get fewer and fewer Bran chapters. And I understand why, because Bran's going to come out of this with so much knowledge. You have to keep him, you have to keep him minuscule, because when he does eventually pop back up, he's just going to know too much.
Yeah, so I think Jackie C and a couple other people in the chat here hit it on the head. Bran wants to be a hero, essentially. He wants to be sung about and remembered. He wants to be the hero from one of the songs or Old Nan stories, essentially. And that is, again, you're right. He's very young, so you can't define his desires in an adult way yet. He doesn't know. And that is another conflict that's set up with Bran, is any of the characters that are very young are dealing with lost innocence. Dany, Arya, Sansa, Bran. And so there's always a basic struggle to hang on to your humanity, or to figure out like who you want to be in the face of such heavy necessity. That's another thing, is necessity is weighing down hard on a lot of these characters. Bran has the fate of the world put on his hands. Dany will eventually. Jon's worried about the others. Under that kind of pressure, you don't get a lot of freedom to have, to figure out what you even want to do. You just have to try to survive or try to save the day. But if we can see that Bran's real desire is to be a hero, then, and yes, Tony's right, he views his older brothers as heroes as well. Mm-hmm. Then Bran, you can see a path forward. As Bran gains knowledge through his Weirwood Net exploration, he'll realize what needs to be done in order to save the world. And he'll probably take a lot of joy in having some sort of heroic role to play. So I do not see his path going towards book Bran or show Bran, where he becomes this dispassionate sort of android. I don't think we'll ever see anything like that from Bran. Bloodraven isn't even like that. And that doesn't really make sense as a resolution to his conflict, does it?
No, I think Bran, despite having basically becoming all the world's knowledge, becoming a living encyclopedia, I don't think he's going to be like the robot that the show made him out to be. I do see a lot more that he's going to be a lot more lively when he does show up. And he's going to know, like, okay, but when he does show up, he's probably, I think when Bran pops up, he's going to know, like, I have to get to this person and let them know this. I need to get to this person and let them know this. I need to get to this person and let them know this. I don't think he's going to be aloof and purposely vague. I think when he does come up, he's going to be like, shit needs to get done. We need to do it. And you need to know.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I also think that that's a good point that you make about, like, he misses everyone. He's been away from everyone since the very beginning of the story. And I do see him using his Green Seer power to reach out to his brothers and sisters, just as he reached out to Jon and opened his third eye and showed him how to skin change his wolf. I've been predicting he's going to reach out to Sansa as well. And so as his powers, the thing about Bran is, like, he's so innocent and he's being given so much power. And we've mostly focused on the dark side of that. Like, he doesn't really even understand fully what he's doing by removing Hodor's agency and taking over his body. Like, he can obviously see that Hodor is frightened by it. But he's 9 or 10 or whatever. He just does not fully understand how wrong that is. Okay. And he doesn't really have anyone telling him either. So Bran's innocence is really being put on the altar of necessity, and also just all this power that he's being given without a whole lot of guardrails. So this is both a tragic element of Bran's story and a source of exterior conflict. However, just to get back to what we've been saying, I think if we say that Bran wants to be a hero, then I think he will find a lot of joy in using the Green Seer power to both be a hero and to reconnect with his family. So yeah, just like you said, the opposite of aloof and removed. His what I was trying to say is that the other side of the innocence coin is that he does have a boy's wonder and joy. And you can see when he contacts Jon, as he's very like carefree. He's like, oh, no, I'm not scared of the dark. The dark's great. You just have to open your eye like this. And he gives a little boop. And so, you know.
And Bran is like, because Bran is supposed to be a foil to someone like Varamir, because like you said, Bran doesn't know he's doing wrong by skin changing Hodor because he hasn't had anyone to tell him about the skin changer rules. Varamir did. Varamir made an active choice to throw those rules away. All Bran has is Bloodraven, and Bloodraven hasn't told those rules. But the other thing about when we think Bloodraven is Bloodraven might not have had anyone to tell him those rules either, because we know very little about Bloodraven's young life, who taught him to be a skin changer. For all we know, Bloodraven was also kind of just learning as he goes, and he might not even know that those rules are a thing.
Yeah, Bloodraven is pretty close to an amoral character. You know, he's thinking mostly about necessity. He's willing to do dishonorable things if it thinks it serves the greater good. That's been true since before he ever joined the Watch and became a Greenseer. So yeah. Bran the Boop Lord. I like that. That's good. Bran is the Boop Lord. That'll be the title of the video. So let's see here. Next up is Catelyn Stark. Catelyn Stark. I was a little cheeky here in the notes. I put desires, family, duty, honor. Opposition, family, duty, honor. Because it's kind of like those things are all fighting with each other throughout her whole story. You want to take that in a certain direction and run with it? Let me go get Cleo, Tim. I'll be right back.
Okay. So Catelyn, family, duty, honor. And Catelyn's up against a lot, but at the same time, she's also creating her own issues. The way she treats Jon, but also the way that she has to deal with her own crazy sister and Lysa, and also dealing with the faults of her father, who's sick and dying on his deathbed. But then those still reflecting, those still hold a heavy weight, even though he is incapable of dealing with those ramifications. Now it's left to her family to deal with those ramifications.
Minty, what did Tim say? Was it smart? I missed it. Yep. Okay, good. All right, good. I'm sure it was. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was doing the Cleo business. So, quick summary. Where do we go with that?
Well, I was talking about like Catelyn's. I guess I'll just repeat it all over again.
Oh, don't have to read the whole thing, Tim. That would be bad entertainment. Let me do your best.
Okay, so I was talking about Catelyn dealing with like her feelings towards Jon, but then also how she has to interact with Eliza, and also then dealing with the legacy of her father and his actions and how that still affects the family, even while he's on his deathbed. And how they have to deal with what he did in the past. I guess we could talk like the Southron ambitions that Hoster Tully engaged in that led to Catelyn's current position. Her originally being promised to Brandon Stark and then having to be married off to Ned Stark after Bran is killed by the Mad King, only for Ned to return with this bastard child of his. And she had already left everything that she had known behind, left the Riverlands, moved to the north where they don't even have the same religion. It's a completely different culture.
Okay, so hold on right there. So you've just already hit on a conflict there. Ned is presenting Jon as family, but Jon is also a mark of dishonor on Catelyn because he's supposedly Ned's bastard. So Catelyn has a conflict there of, do I see this boy as family because I'm sort of in a mother role, but it's also dishonoring me in this way because of the lie that Ned's told. Similarly, when she lets Jaime go, she does it because she's thinking of her daughters. So this is about family, but then she's dishonoring Robb and undermining his authority. So it's very much she's put in these positions where you see that family, duty, honor is like, that's a little too much to put on anyone's plate to try to balance all of those things, they're frequently going to come into conflict, especially when you think about family, because loyalty to family just basically means loyalty to people, even if they do messed up stuff. So that's going to lead you to a place of dishonor if one of your family is dishonorable. And that's going to test your loyalty. So it's that Tully credo is rife with conflict, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so many oaths they make you swear and swear. It's a little bit like Jaime. Yeah.
And we can see like Brynden Blackfish, the Blackfish, in his own way, he kind of fights against that while still maintaining the family words. Like, okay, family, duty, and honor. Well, then I'm going to go with Lysa to the Vale because that is my family, and I'm going to do duty to her. But by doing that, he was dishonoring his brother Hoster Tully by not going through with Hoster's wishes, which would that be Brynden, take a wife, settle down, do the whole thing that a lord's younger brother is expected to do.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. All that stuff.
I mean, I do think that the Blackfish is a rugged gay man.
I think that's probably what George is imagining. It's not directly spelled out, but he's not marrying for reasons that are personal. Let's say that. So I'm not sure what that could be other than him being maybe aromantic or asexual or gay. But that's some people are very against that theory. I tend to think that Blackfish is a rugged gay man, just like you said. Yeah, but
I think just too many people want, if a character is going to be gay, to play into those stereotypes. And it's like, no, there are very masculine gay men out there, and the Blackfish should just be an example of one of them. Like,
yeah, and
people are people. Like, your sexual orientation does not define all of your character traits.
Yeah, and George is pretty good at depicting that. We see there's characters across the spectrum all over the place in the story of all sorts. John Conn is a gay man, so is Loras. Dany is bisexual. And so there you go. Yeah. In any case, yeah, Spartans were very gay. So yeah, it's any case that you can see how all of the Tullys are dealing with the inherent conflict of their family words. So with that family, George has set it up right in their credo, and it's very, very emblematic of medieval arranged marriage sort of lifestyle and all the tricky parts that come with that. Because exactly right. Catelyn was expecting to marry Brandon, who was not somebody that she chose, but at least she was used to the idea. And then it's like, oh no, here's a different Stark. Marry him now. And it's like, it really emphasizes what a lack of free will that everyone has in a medieval society. So, okay, so let's see. Let's talk about Mr. Eddard Stark. His desires are really simple. He just wants to live a peaceful life in the North, Tim. Why can't everyone just leave Eddard alone so he can hunt and tell stories and fish with the kids? That's what he wants, right?
I think Ned's carrying a lot of guilt. He's carrying a lot of trauma. He's carrying a lot of secrets, obviously, with Jon. Like, Ned's got so much weighing in on him on the back of his mind, and he's just stuck in this place where he feels like he can't tell anybody. Because the thing is like, it's something you pick up on is, why didn't, like, Ned stuck when he first brought Jon home, and he proclaimed Jon as his bastard. Like, there you see a necessity in that, especially with Catelyn, because they did not know each other, and he didn't know who he could trust. And because he had already come to the realization, we had talked about this like last stream, when Ned sees the dead bodies of Rhaegar's children, and he sees Robert's reaction to that, and then he realizes, shit, this could extend to my own family if my best friend finds out that my nephew is a Targaryen. So if I can't even trust my best friend, how am I supposed to trust this woman that I barely know, that I married out of duty and obligation? But as the years go by, even as Ned and Catelyn build this trust over the years, he still doesn't tell her the truth. And and we can say, like, hindsight's 2020. It would have saved everyone a world of grief if Ned could have just been at least honest with Catelyn and just been said, hey, this isn't my bastard child. This is my nephew. And that actually could have helped at least taken the sting away from Catelyn a little bit, to be like, okay, this isn't a child of my husband's infidelity. This is his nephew. I don't have to treat him like a son. I can kind of keep him more at arm's length because he's just a nephew, but I can still welcome him in as family.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think one of the only things you can conclude there is that Ned may have either feared what Catelyn would do or would want to do. Like, she might have agreed more with Robert. And you see insight into that when Cat is talking to Robb about legitimizing Jon, and she brings up the Blackfires and how many generations of strife can come from a lack of clarity in the line of descent. I think she's more arguing from practicality than pride there, and she's making a valid point. And so what Ned was doing was kind of overly compassionate, if you will. He's essentially breaking the rules, compromising his own marriage, or compromising really the North. He's risking another war with Robert just to hide his sister's kid. Now, I'm not saying he should have killed baby Jon or anything like that, but by lying about it and taking him home, he's protecting a Targaryen heir after a rebellion where Robert just killed all the Targaryens. So Ned is taking a giant fucking risk by taking Jon home and saying that he's his. And if he had shared that knowledge with Cat very well may not have agreed with that decision. And she might be like, I'm doing our family and the entire North a favor if Jon falls down a well someday. I'm not saying Catelyn would do that, but maybe she would, because you could see the reasoning behind that. So perhaps either Ned didn't just want to even have the conversation, or he just didn't think that necessarily she would agree with him, because he has this compassion for Lyanna that Catelyn really doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think of that? In the chat. And I like Cat. This isn't me like hating on Cat, being like, oh yeah, she'd kill Jon. I'm just saying, like, this is the position that Ned and Lyanna and Rhaegar created. Lyanna and Rhaegar by having baby Jon the way that they did, and then Ned by keeping the secret. Like, they're creating a situation that's pretty tough that Catelyn then just is forced into. So interesting there. So let me hold on. So I was saying Ned, essentially, he wants to live a peaceful life in the North, but the opposition to that is essentially, as you said, the legacy of Robert's rebellion. All these secrets, all the fallout, it drags him back into the politics. And that is what he hates. And that's what he doesn't want, is to go to King's Landing and get caught in all the politics. But of course he does. And that is why Ned is an interesting character, because he's being dragged down at King's Landing against his will. And he's trying to do the right thing because that's what Ned does. But he's not experienced enough with the players and the circumstances to see the truth quickly enough. And he doesn't listen to Renly when he should have. We'll talk about Renly a little bit later as well. Hashtag Renly did nothing wrong. Yeah, so there's Ned. So let's go on to Jon, having talked about Ned. We'll do Jon and Arya next. Yeah, so Jon Snow, what would you say that Jon wants, Mr. Greywaste Tim?
One of the things that Jon wants is he wants to know who his real mother is. But one of the oppositions that comes from that, the conflict that comes from that, is finding out who she actually is, and then finding out who he actually is, and all the ramifications that come from that. Now, we kind of just discussed that, like if Ned had told Catelyn, like if he had felt trust enough, what would her reaction have been? And it could have gone that way. She might have turned him over to Robert, or maybe she would have seen Ned's obligations to his family and kept the secret too. We don't know. Those are words left unsaid. But Jon's going to be in that position where when he does find out, what does he do with that knowledge? And worse, what do others do with that knowledge if they find out? Because like I said, like Jon, if we go back to what we had said about when all the Stark children return to the North, but they're all going to have their different backers trying to press their claims. When someone else catches wind of who and what Jon actually is, just think of who's going to be trying to use him as their puppet, as their chess piece to move him forward, to try and press their own intentions, to try and get their own things.
And even though the show didn't make a ton of sense with what it did with RLJ, you could still see the potential for all kinds of trouble when people realize there's two potential Targaryens around and they're both doing heroic things. So so his desire for identity is inherently laced with conflict because of who he is. So he wants to know who he is. He wants to know whose child he is, who his family is. He wants family, but his family is full of conflict, and the reveal will be full of more conflict. So that's a great one. And as a sort of companion to that, and just thinking about Jon individually as a person without the context of his lineage, I would say that what Jon desires is to be honorable and to prove his worthiness. He's going against this idea of being a bastard. There's feelings of alienation and rejection that are standing in the way of this, that are opposing him, right? Because being a bastard is alienating. Being raised with the Starks, but being not fully apart, that's made very clear in the first chapter, where Jon doesn't include himself in the count of the wolves, so that there's 5 wolves for 5 kids. Then he finds his wolf, but it's driven out from the pack for some reason. So that's Jon in a nutshell. Then he goes to the Watch, and he ends up getting mutinied by his own brothers. So there's a lot of alienation and rejection. And meanwhile, Jon is trying to prove himself worthy. So he's comparing himself to Robb. And Robb, of course, is trained by Ned to be the heir to Winterfell. But Ned also includes Jon on those meetings too, probably because Ned is imagining, well, Jon will be Robb's first general, and he'll need to know the strategy too, and stuff like that, or something along those lines. But for Jon, he's comparing himself to Robb. And for Robb, it's easy. Robb wants to make his dad proud. And that's just to talk about Robb real quick. That's his desire. He wants to be a good firstborn son. He wants to be everything Ned was and expects him to be. And he does pretty well at that. Obviously, he makes a couple fatal mistakes. But for a 15-year-old kid, he does a great job leading the North, catalyzing all the, uniting the clans, and having success in the field with some pretty ingenuitive thinking. He handles certain situations pretty well, some not as well. The Stark situation. But Jon is comparing himself to Robb, and Jon doesn't even know who his mom is. And he thinks often of Ned throughout his arc, and how he dreamed of one day Ned giving him ice, even though he doesn't necessarily, he also dreams of killing Robb and saying, I'm the Lord of Winterfell. So you can see that, like, he's placed right next to Robb, and in every way he feels, inferior. Yeah. So what he wants ultimately, Jon is looking to prove himself worthy of love and respect and not being disreputable. And so you can see there's a little bit of a father figure relationship with Qhorin Halfhand and Lord Mormont and Mance Rayder. And it's continuing the same sort of thing where Jon really does want people like that to look up to him. He wants to make them proud. But he's also, another conflict of Jon's, he's trying to do what's right, but he's often in these very tough circumstances where, like, he's behind enemy lines and stuff. So there's a lot of conflict.
Yeah.
With old Johnny boy.
And the thing is like Jon has, even though he has those thoughts about killing Robb, about the idea of him inheriting ice, he also immediately feels a sense of shame for having those thoughts. And when you talk about, like, Ned possibly envisioning Jon being Robb's sort of right-hand man, I think that goes into show, like who are Jon's heroes? Well, one of Jon's biggest heroes is Aemon the Dragon Knight. Aemon the Dragon Knight was brother to Aegon the Fourth, the Unworthy, one of his Kingsguard. Now, Aemon the Dragon Knight is considered one of the most dutiful, honorable men, yet he was brother to the biggest piece of shit we've ever seen. Now, take those qualities though, but think if you had the same qualities that Aemon the Dragon Knight had, but with an actual good brother like Robb, and think of how much of even more upstanding person he would be, because that would have been like the go-to team of people working together. Makes you think like if maybe Aegon the Fourth was more like Aegon the Fifth or Aegon the First and had someone like Aemon the Dragon Knight by their side, think of how much more they could have accomplished.
That's a really good point.
It is. It's like sometimes we're cursed with family.
Yeah, there's going to be a few characters whose has siblings listed in their opposition column. So that's pretty well put with Jon. The last point I want to make with Jon is that he does have a strong moral compass. Not only like obviously protecting Sam when other people are bullying Sam, and he's able to see Sam's usefulness when other people see him as useless. That's a very perceptive, wise, and kind move on Jon's part. He's pretty consistent about that. But the most impressive thing he does is seeing through the bullshit about the wildlings. You know, it's essentially the biggest racist stereotype in Westeros is the wildlings and the way that they are characterized. And Jon sees through that pretty quick. And then that leads to him making the decision to try to begin reconciling the wildlings to Westeros before the long night falls. Now, again, with the imperfect characters, the rollout is pretty shitty. He sends his friends away, and then he gives the tough medicine to the people that are left without any sugar. Okay. So this was not smart. The way he dealt with it was not, like I said, the rollout wasn't very good. He should have kept his friends close and used them to have influence on the other brothers. But he's not a seasoned politician. He didn't understand that. So even though Jon tries to do the right thing, that's also struggling against his own inexperience and naivete. And, the idea of following oaths that aren't necessarily always perfect, a little bit like Jaime. So yeah, a few extra points there for Jon. Yeah. But I did want to say that his moral compass will, I think, be part of the foundation of Jon and Dany's sort of seeing something in each other, because they are characters who both really try to protect other people and do the right thing, no matter how hard that is. Besides both being Targaryens, I think they have that common moral compass and determination to stick to that moral compass that I think will resonate with each other. So,
and that's what I say. Like when Jon does start with those biases at first against the free folk, like it takes getting to know them to actually get to that state of mind that he's in, where he does finally let them pass the wall. Because like when he first meets Ygritte and she tells him that story of Bael the Bard, Jon is actually he actually has a little bit of outrage when he hears that story, because he's like, well, that would imply that there's wildling blood in Stark ancestry. And it's like, well, yeah, Jon, they're people. And there's always going to be an intermingling. And like and especially when you both have First Men heritage, like it's actually to be expected that there might have been some cross-cultural fucking, I guess we'll just say, that finally leads down to your generation.
Yeah, Jon is somebody that has several growth moments, like when Donald Noy calls him out for being a bully in the training yard, and Jon doesn't realize that his own feelings of alienation and victimhood has led him to bullying the other kids, and he hasn't stopped to think about the fact that none of them are court trained, by a master at arms, and that they're all intimidated by him. And so there's several moments like that where George shows him losing his foolishness and sort of gaining insight through hard lessons like that. And I expect that to continue. But yeah, that's how you do character growth. And that's the whole point of the Heart and Conflict, is to create a journey for the character. So, oh girl, Make me sorry I took you out.
Aw.
All right. Try to calm her with Cleo emojis in the chat. If you are a channel member, for the low price of $5 a month, of course, you get access to special emojis, which I have created. One of them is a Cleo emoji. And you also get one free super chat a month, which you can use on a stream like this to get a highlighted comment. Also, you have a cool squisher icon next to your name, and your text appears green like Seabob and Desmond. And who else is in the chat here? What other squishers are in the house? Some of my mods are squishers too, like Downtown Clowny Brown.
Like me.
Oh, Tim, are you a squisher? Look at you.
I am a squisher.
Oh, congratulations. Sorry, I should know that, but I appreciate it. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so yeah, the Clemoji. Who is next? Let's talk about Arya. Also, her chapters are titled Cat of the Canal, The Blind Girl, and The Ugly Little Girl. What would you say that Arya wants, Tim?
She wants to get through that list of hers, for one thing.
She wants to kill a lot of people. Yes, well. This is a good example of the process that I went through last night. So that's the first thing that came to my mind. Oh, well, she wants revenge. Mm-hmm. But actually, you have to go back to the beginning of the character's arc to figure out what they really want. Revenge is only what she wants now as a result of her trauma. Arya fundamentally is a joyful character who enjoys experiencing life. She likes, much like Lyanna, she loves being wild and crazy. She loves having unexpected adventures. She doesn't like to conform to the expectations of her gender in that society. She's somebody who just kind of wants to do her own freaking thing, at least as of the point when the story starts. She wants to learn how to use a sword, even though that's forbidden. She likes adventure. She's always getting into things, defying expectations. So you can see what kind of character this is. A lot of us are these kind. She's a shit starter. She's a rebel. But at the center of those kinds of personalities is a joyfulness and a love of experiencing life. And I would say the same thing about Lyanna. And that's why we're told she loved horseback riding and she had the wolf blood. It's kind of wild. And so that's the kind of person she is. And Arya also has a lot of family pride, right? So the opposition for Arya is actually her desire for revenge and her trauma. Those are the things that are standing in the way of her experiencing life and finding joy. So I start off thinking, oh, well, what she wants is revenge. That's actually the opposition of what she wants. That's the thing that is robbing her of the ability to experience joy and to be fun and carefree, which is essentially her true nature. So we will have to see if Arya is obviously going down a very dark path. She's murdering people, some people that deserve it, some people that don't. But the point is, like, she's being turned into an assassin and she's like 11. So it's pretty dark stuff, especially that Mercy chapter. We expect it to get darker still. And she's going to be leading that wolf pack. It's going to be a lot of violence around Arya. So the question is, at the end of her story, will there be anything left of the joy and the desire to experience life? If there is, that could lead to a similar ending on the show. This is one of the things I thought did make sense, with Arya going to explore unknown lands in a ship. And of course, her wolf's namesake is Nymeria, a woman who explored unknown lands by ship. So I do think that it makes sense, because it makes sense as a resolution of her heart in conflict. What do you think of that, Tim?
Yeah, I think Arya is full of these conflicts because she says she wants to be no one, but she doesn't. She wants to be Arya Stark.
That's right.
Arya, because the story of all the Stark children, for the most part, is a story of children who were forced to grow up way too quick because of circumstance and the terrible things that happen. But Arya's emphasizes this even more, the fact that she's so young and that she's going down this dark road of being a child assassin. But at the same time, I think I don't think the faceless men like are unaware of the situation. I think they're fully aware that Arya does not intend to truly take up what their ideals are, that she's not truly going to give up her identity. But I do see that they still see her as a means to an end, which is when she does get back to Westeros. I think Arya's storyline is going to lead her back to her mother. Like, I do think that it's going to be Arya that is the one to kind of put Lady Stoneheart out of her misery.
Yeah,
And that's
I agree. I agree with that. The only way that doesn't happen is if Jaime or Brienne need to light Oathkeeper with Stoneheart's fiery Stoneheart. But apart from that, I do think it would make sense to see Arya give the gift of mercy to Mother Merciless, who very much needs to be put out of her misery.
exactly.
So yeah, I could definitely see that. Yeah, so this is Arya's character is very tragic, obviously, because of all this lost innocence. And she was such a joyful character at the beginning, and so much very dark shit has happened to her. Like I said, though, I think there will be a kernel of that joy left at the beginning. And even though she'll be heavily traumatized, I do think that leaving Westeros and exploring as Nymeria did will be a good way for her to try to show us that she's searching for that, or trying to rekindle that joy despite all the sadness and suffering that she's been through. So that's what I think. And you can see, guys, how thinking about the heart and conflict can lend clarity to thinking about where the characters' stories are going to go. Because a lot of times when we think about where the stories are going to go, we're thinking of the main story and the magical elements and symbolic foreshadowing. But I think this is almost the best way to do it, is to really think about what is their heart and conflict and how could it be satisfactorily addressed. It doesn't have to be resolved in a way that is happy. Some people are going to be victims of their conflicts and never resolve them. And you'll see that that is why they are doomed. So I'm not saying that every heart and conflict has to be resolved happily. It just needs to be addressed. If they overcome that conflict, that is an ending of resolution for them. And if they're unable to resolve the conflict, then that's why characters struggle. Quentyn Martell, that's a good example. Like, his desire is all wrapped up in being the heir, the Prince of Dorne, right? Mm-hmm. He wants to make his father proud. He wants to ride the dragon to show that he's worthy. So it's another worthiness type of thing. But he doesn't have common sense. And Doran has essentially sent him on a bit of a fool's errand. And so he ends up in this tragic role because he's not able to discern the thing that's best for Dorne, because he's too wrapped up in the idea of he personally needs to prove himself worthy to his father. If he if he didn't have that chip on his shoulder, that something to prove, he could have been more strategic in his thinking and still forged an alliance with Daenerys, because Daenerys needed Dorne. It just wasn't going to be the way that he thought. It wasn't going to be marrying her and riding a dragon. Like, he needed to rethink that plan and come up with a different plan, and he might have been successful. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and because Quentyn, he also shares that with his sister Arianne, is that they're both trying to please their father, Doran Martell, who has these very high standards. And Doran Martell, like, for as much as he hates Tywin Lannister, he shares traits with Tywin in the way that he interacts with his children. It actually makes me wish that we knew more about how Trystane felt about it, because we really don't get much on Trystane, and I wonder, like, what exactly he's doing, because it seems like if his two older siblings are in this situation, he's probably also in a situation where he's trying to vie for Doran's approval and affection that they're just not getting from him. And then Quentyn's in a situation because he's not even at Sunspear. Like, he's being fostered, and yet Doran Martell still looms so large. Then he crosses the ocean to Meereen, and Doran Martell, this man who's stuck in his chair, still looms large. Like, that is how much of a hold Doran Martell has over his children. From half a world away, all of Quentyn's actions are, I need to live up to what dad wants. Like, I need to prove myself and and further his cause and do what he needs me to do out here.
So I think we've put our finger on Doran's big mistake. He's using his children as generals, as his top lieutenants in this secret effort to launch a fucking war against the throne. Okay? And because of the way that he has raised his children and been secretive and shit, his children both have these emotional issues. We'll talk about Arion next, since that's the same. Quentyn wants to prove himself. Meanwhile, Arion is jealous because she's misunderstood Doran's plotting and thinks that she's being replaced as firstborn. So that is what motivates Arion when she is hatching her Queenmaker plot, which of course leads to disaster. She is thinking about she's become alienated from her father because she doesn't understand the strategy. So she thinks that he's weak and stupid. And she's jealous of her brother because she thinks she's being replaced when she's actually not. Because again, Doran's been secretive. So if you're going to use your children as your lieutenants, you need to do this all differently. You should have had a relationship of more openness so that they wouldn't have so many issues, first of all. And second of all, so that they'd all be working together. He tried to keep everybody separate and in the dark, with him being the only one who knew everything. So that is that has put his kids in a tough situation, as you said.
Yep. And Doran's problem is that, like, even though he plans everything out meticulously, he waits too long, and the problem with him is that he's too secretive. Like, that's actually the thing. You think keeping a secret like that should further your cause, but it's like, but you're keeping it secret from everybody, including the people that you need to move forward to know. Like, well, you can't expect pawns to just completely do everything correctly. You have to give them at least a little nugget of information to work on so that they move to the right spot. And he literally is treating this like a game of Savas without realizing, like, well, no, these pieces have wills of their own. They're not going to move all in the same way that you want them to. And it's like, and that's the thing, Doran Martell is like, the story of Doran Martell is his plans always fail. He plans them out meticulously, and they always fail. That is it, and that's going to be his legacy.
Yeah, you wonder if Doran might have a trust issue. He's using his children and his family because it's the only people he can trust. But even them, he still has the trust issue and doesn't tell them the whole plan. So
and
we're pretty far away from a situation of a battle commander sitting down with his best minds and coming up with a strategy together that they enact. It's a very different scenario. So there's a lot of hubris on Doran's part. So just to finish off with Ariane, she is seeking approval from her dad, but also power. She really likes playing politics. I think she desires to be an effective player of the game. She just likes politics straight up, as Tyrion does. So that's one of her desires. Her oppositional forces are, again, naivete and immaturity, like many of the other young characters. And then this insecurity that we're talking about because of the way that Doran has kept these secrets and the relationship between her and Quentyn and Doran. And then she's also jealous. So she's got a lot of emotional stuff to overcome in order to become a good general, quote unquote, for her dad. I'm not even sure which way this is going to go. How's she going to deal with the Fagon situation? Will she sort of fall for the pretty face and not see, some of the nastier traits that Fagon has shown? Or will she able to assess, how strong his position is? I'm not sure.
She is a sucker for a pretty face. Like we've seen that.
But I do think there's possibility for growth with her character too. I don't necessarily think she's another Quentyn story. I don't know that it's going to end the same way necessarily, but we will see. That one's right in the middle for me. And then you've got the Elia Sand wild card as well, of course. So I think that basically she's going to have it almost locked, and then it's going to be the Elia thing that screws it up. So she'll almost have it right, but then it will go sideways at the last second, probably. We'll see. So real quick, I got a super chat, and that means, what does it mean? It means the super chat theremin is active. Thank you, Mellifluous. Hey, David. Could the taboo against kinslaying in Westeros come from the Bloodstone Emperor murdering his sister wife and causing the Long Night? Which I think, of course, is also the same story as Azor Ahai murdering Nissa Nissa, his wife. So, yes, I'm a fan of this idea that a lot of the cultural taboos date back to this. Like, for example, in Karth, the women bear one breast, just as it says Nissa Nissa bared her breast to Azor Ahai to forge Lightbringer. So to the extent Nissa Nissa might be remembered as a hero, bearing one breast may very well be a tradition done in remembrance of her. Is it in Karth or Slaver's Bay that they do that? It's Karth, actually, isn't it?
Yes, the Carthene gown that has the one exposed breast.
Slaver's Bay does the toe cart, which is also silly, but it's different. Okay, yeah, so it's in
the
Karth.
thing you can't walk in.
And I've pointed out that Karth is right on the edge of the Great Empire of the Dawn territories. They've got a lot of ancient magic, and I think they very much see themselves as a part of that lineage. So, yes, I do think even all the way over in Westeros, this, because we don't even know where the Azor Ahai Nissa murder happened. It could have happened in Westeros, I think on the God's Eye potentially. So, yes, I do think this could be where the kinslaying taboo comes from. And let's use that as a segue to talk about Maester Crescent and Davos, two characters whose stories intersect with Stannis and whose stories have a lot to do with blood magic and the whole morality of blood sacrifice and the Azor Ahai fable. So thank you. Also, let me give a shout out to Chris, who sent me a PayPal. No question, just excited to catch me live. And thank you, Chris. What do you think of that, girl? All right. So let's talk about Maester Crescent.
Okay, so Maester Crescent, like this, the opening let's start off. The opening prologue to A Clash of Kings. One of the best prologue. The introduction of Melisandre and the introduction of Stannis, and then our I have a certain fondness for Patchface. He over the years he's just come to grow on me.
He is a great character. He really is. And I'm glad to see more Maester Crescent art coming out lately. The Aranza Sesteo Maester Crescent on the Dragonstone thing with the gargoyles on either side is great. I've used that art already for a screen cap, one of my videos. But basically, he wants to keep his wayward stag boys safe. He's basically the adopted father of Renly, Stannis, and Robert since their parents went down on the Windproud over Shipbreaker Bray all those years ago. And so he's thinking about the tragedy of Renly running around playing the Game of Thrones, but without the seriousness that it requires, perhaps. And he's thinking about Stannis, obviously. So he's trying to protect Stannis. Maester Crescent also desires to maintain the established order, though. And this is an important thing. As a Maester of the Citadel, he's heavily indoctrinated into a certain way of thinking. This is what justifies him taking the action of attempted murder, of murdering Melisandre, because he thinks that her religion is demonic and evil and shouldn't be in Westeros. So there's, on one hand, Relorism is kind of evil. They use blood sacrifice. That's fucked up for sure. I'm definitely very clear on my stance on blood sacrifice. I don't think that it's ever supposed to be justified in the story. So in that sense, sure. But in another sense, it's also just the fact that it's a weird foreign religion that makes him uncomfortable. And so he essentially his rigid worldview is one of the things that is a source of conflict. He's unable to protect Stannis because he risks everything on this one act of trying to assassinate Melisandre. When that doesn't happen, he's gone and can no longer influence Stannis. And this is in stark contrast to Davos, who also doesn't approve of blood sacrifice, but picks his moments a lot better and bides his time so that he can continue to advise Stannis and steer him down the right course, which he does. So what do you think of that?
Well, I think for one thing, like Crescent's taking, I think when Crescent does the actions he does, like he's taking his age into account, like, and because when we are introduced to Crescent, like one of the things that George tells us as a character, what part of his character is that with his age, like he had a tumble down the stairs that he's never really quite recovered from, which is why a younger maester has been brought in. Like he already sees, like, I'm on my way out the door. Stannis is preparing for that. Like Stannis isn't even giving the courtesies that a maester is due anymore, because Stannis kind of sees like, yeah, you know, you're still my maester, but I got this new one. You're kind of more or less just here until you croak. And that's so what Crescent takes, like, I think Crescent sees like, I don't have much time. So, which is how he differs from Davos. Like Davos is going to be, as a younger man, is going to be around longer and going to have more opportunities to try and push Stannis in that right direction. So Crescent at least is like, well, if I only have one shot, I have to take it.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. That's a good point. That does make a little more sense. But nevertheless, it's interesting to see the contrast between the two different strategies of like, I'm going to go nuclear and try to kill this thing right now, or I'm going to bide my time, try to play the game, but influence it in my direction. It reminds me of certain political sort of discussions on the left of, you know, working within the system or just opposing the system outright, kind of.
But I think, like, despite his rigidity, what Crescent does recognize, and this goes with Rolorism, and even if Rolorism didn't have the tenets that it did, let's say it was even if it was a sugary, flowery religion where everything was great and dandy, it's still the fact that you're bringing in alien, foreign religion. No matter what, that's always going to have ramifications, especially when there already is an established religion, when you have the Faith of the Seven. Because the Faith of the Seven still has kind of its own little, it doesn't come up very often, but there still have the occasional at odds with the old gods of the North. But when you're bringing in something that's completely foreign like that, you should expect some kind of political blowback from that. No matter what exactly the religion even entails, just because of the fact, like, you're messing with the established order here. Like,
yeah, for sure. Yeah, Stannis is, gets a reputation for being rigid for things just like that. Even though he is actually flexible in certain situations, he basically just a little bit in common with Jon. Like, it's the medicine without any sugar. He's just like, yep, this is a new religion. Get with it. Like, okay, buddy, like, so, and just to talk about Stannis real quick, Stannis, I think down deep wants to be a good king. We see that when he makes the decision to go north. He wants to be a responsible ruler. What's standing in the way is all the resentment that he's holding on to. Rightfully or wrongfully, Robert was kind of a dick in some of the things that he did after the war. However, holding on to all that resentment has not done Stannis any good. And it led him to almost making the disastrous decision to, try to take the throne. And instead he pulls back from the brink after losing a lot from trying to do that, turns north and starts protecting people, following his, whatever desire he has to do justice. And this is working out pretty well for him. He's successful now because he's following something closer to his true desires instead of giving in to the resentment and and bitterness and just clinging on to his rights, which is where he starts off as a character. That's mine by rights. It's mine by rights, just on and on. So,
but then he has to get that dose of reality from Renly. It's like, yeah, well, it might be yours by rights, but I'm the one with the army. I'm the one with the men. I'm the one with the numbers. I'm the one with the swords. Like, rights mean nothing when you don't have the power to actually back it up.
So let's talk about Renly. What does Renly want? I put he wants to be fabulous / make Westeros fabulous. And what I mean by this is, like, I'm obviously making a joke about the fact that Renly is gay, but he is more than that, he has the love of the courtly life. That's how Crescent thinks about him, is he loves the bright colored clothes and he loves running about the castle and playing make-believe games. And he thinks to himself, he's still doing that as an adult. So even though Renly is politically astute and is highlighted in the most in that moment when he comes to Ned, with the advice of uniting and taking Cersei unaware, that would have been a much better plan than what Ned did. And he formed a successful alliance with the Reach. They were the best ally in the whole game. So once he made that move of allying with the Reach, he had secured the most powerful army in the land. And if it wasn't for Stannis's blood magic, he would have crushed Stannis. Stannis had no chance of defeating Renly in the field. The only way was through that shadow baby. And so you can see that Renly did almost everything right. What Renly didn't do right is that he succumbed to his own pride and entitlement. You can see that in the way that he dealt with Stannis when he could have forged an alliance somehow. If he had been communicating with Stannis, you can see that in the way he deals with Catelyn when he could have made an alliance with Robb, but didn't. And you can see that in the way that he proceeds very slowly across the country, just having fun and drinking it all in. Now, you can make an argument that that serves a political purpose. Okay. Feeding his knights these tournaments and these things to sort of keep their morale up and keep them together or whatever. But for the most part, Renly, his major mistake was not having enough seriousness in what was going on. And so he did not forge, the best alliances that he could have. But that's almost really a nitpick. Like, honestly, it's only for Stannis's witchcraft, or else Renly would have won the throne, I'm pretty sure. There was nobody else with a comparable force. And the Reach had all the food and everybody's starving.
Yeah.
So
I think when it comes to Renly, like, one thing we got to keep in mind is one of the reasons I think that he was one of these let the good times roll types of kings is because of the childhood that he had. Like, okay, I got to preface this. This is not my original idea. This is from an essay I read years ago, and I wish for the life of me I could remember who wrote it. But they had pointed out there's a huge age disparity between Renly and Stannis. Like, there's a huge age gap. Stannis is about 13 years older than Renly. Now, when we look back at Robert's rebellion and Stannis is told by Robert to hold Storm's End, Stannis is 18 years old and he is put in charge of holding Storm's End against a Tyrell army. That means that Renly is 5. So you got a 5-year-old kid living under his older brother's rule, seeing his stern older brother have to deal with his men starving, having to survive off of rats and shoe leather. And yet, if he looks outside, he sees the gold and green banners of Mace Tyrell and his men feasting. So I think what Renly has is a certain resentment against Stannis of, why don't we just yield and then we can be out there and maybe we can get some food. And I think, like, Renly's kind of living this childhood that he never actually got to have because of his parents dying so young, because of Robert's rebellion happening so young.
So there's some arrested development there then, huh?
Yeah, like, and too, like, when Stannis has resentment against Robert when the rebellion's over. Like, Stannis has resentment against Robert because Robert named Renly as Lord of Storm's End, and he named Stannis as Lord of Dragonstone. Stannis should have seen that as an honor, but really it was but to him it was an insult because he would rather have Storm's End. But also think of Renly. So
it just wouldn't have made any sense to stick a child on Dragonstone with the like Storm's End that's the family seat. That's well managed. The Castellan, the people. That's the place where you can have a ruler who needs a regent.
Yeah, exactly.
He needed Stannis to hold Dragonstone, and Stannis should have seen that.
Because when Robert Rebellion ends, like, Renly is 9. So yeah, of course you want to put him in the place that's still kind of up and running, because you can have a regent and know that your youngest brother is in good hands, and you still have Stannis named as the Lord of Dragonstone. Still means that your that you're in the line of succession until he has a legitimate heir. But Stannis only sees it as an insult because he sees it as, I held Storm's End. I should have been rewarded with Storm's End. Instead, I get Dragonstone, this dreary castle that's nowhere near anything. And then he resents the fact that he's never named Hand.
Yep. So it's a lot of bitterness and resentment. And you see that's a common one. George shows how a lot of different characters struggle with different versions of that bitterness and resentment issue. Stannis, among them, Michael James. Thank you for the super sticker. There you go. That was a pretty good one. So how are you folks doing in the chat? Are you enjoying this? Are we enjoying these the discussion? I certainly had a good time just thinking about this, getting prepared for it. And like I said, a couple of the takes surprised me a little bit. And one of them was the Renly one. Like when I really thought about what Renly wants, I was like, well, he essentially wants to be a king of a glorious and fabulous realm. He wants, where everyone has plenty. Like you said, it probably was shaped by the starving at Storm's End, by that memory. That's a really interesting contrast there. And so, yeah, you think about it, it's like, damn, yeah, Renly really did do most everything right.
Renly's kind of, he has like that Peter Pan syndrome. Like, I have to live my childhood fancies as an adult because I didn't get to experience them when I was a child.
That's pretty funny. Also, Balanced Beans Bookkeeping with a PayPal. Thank you, Balanced Beans. There we go. Try to mix it up. Sometimes delay, sometimes not delay. There we go. Yes, Renly and the Rainbow Guard. A little on the nose. Yeah, it sure was. Sure was.
Although I do believe George said in like one of his so spoke Martins, like that that was actually like unintentional on his end. It was more about Renly just liking bright colors, that it was a Rainbow Guard.
Right, and not every gay person likes fucking bright colors, as we've seen. John Connington is not a bright colors guy. Like there's, Blackfish Tully. If he's gay, he's not one of those types either. He's the opposite. He's a very serious soldier type, with a little bit of kindly grandfather in him. So yeah, obviously, George is not coupling those stereotypes and identities together necessarily, but. Renly likes bright colors, so good for Renly. I do too. I love bright colors, as anyone who watches my channel knows, or looks at my friggin' background and my parrots, and yeah, I like things to be fabulous. There's nothing wrong with that. So next up, we've got maybe that's what's biasing me towards Renly, because everybody's so friggin' grim all the time. At least Renly's has some joy. I also like sarcastic people. Renly's pretty funny. His japes are amusing, Yeah,
I do think Renly would have been a good summer king, but he never would have been prepared for the winter that's coming. Like he would have been a continuation of Robert, probably with less drunkenness. Like I don't see him becoming the glutton that maybe not so much, or maybe he would, but I just don't see him going as far gone as Robert did. It's more like Robert Light. That would have been Renly's reign.
Yeah, I tend to think that Renly would have paid a little more attention to the realm than Robert. And let's actually talk about Robert. I added him late in the day to the list. So his desires, pretty simple, really. He likes being horny. He wants to be horny. It's Robert Baratheon. He wants to be horny and drinking, fucking, and fighting. That's what Robert Baratheon enjoys. And I'm, of course, being playful, but that really is the case. Robert's a frat boy. He doesn't want to do a lot of serious stuff. Not everybody needs to want to do really serious shit in life. That's actually okay. And Robert essentially just doesn't want to grow up. He just wants to revel and to drink and fight and fuck. Like I said, that's what he wants. And the opposition to that is that he became king.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really with Robert, it's not a story of well, he wants to be a good king. Why isn't he a good king? Well, no, he didn't really want to be a good king. He didn't want to be king at all. That's the problem. Is that you had somebody who really wasn't, he liked fighting, and he was backed into a corner. He was more than happy to fight a rebellion for his own freedom, but he didn't want to be king. He wasn't a good choice. And that essentially ruined his desires. And that's why he ends up such a sad person, is because he didn't, to the extent that he did what he wanted, which is drinking and being merry, he knew also that he was being a bad king by doing that, which eroded his self-esteem. There was some part of him that was aware that he was a bad king, because he confessed, he knew it on his deathbed when he was talking to Ned. He's like, I've been as bad as Ares.
Yeah, he had, gods, I was strong then. Like, he looks back on this past that when he peaked, and that's all he can look back on. And when now he's king, but it's like, my best years were before I was king, and it's like, well, all right, I got this throne, but it's just all downhill from here because I won it, and I won the throne, but now what do I do with it? I didn't really want it to begin with. And I think, like, it really stands to reason, like, why Robert didn't if he was so unhappy, why he didn't abdicate even before. Like, now he gives the reasoning later of, well, that would put Joffrey in charge. But even before Joffrey was born, he could have handed it to Tywin if it truly made him that miserable.
It was Jon Arryn. That was who was the caretaker. Jon Arryn was essentially managing shit as his hands. And that was how Robert imagined that the situation was under control. Well, Jon Arryn's very responsible, and he's running this shit. I don't know. I don't like counting coppers, but Mr. Arryn, he loves that shit. So he's on top of it. I think that's kind of what he told himself. And then as soon as he died, he went running to Ned. He's like, hey, I need a responsible person to do this stuff. I don't really want to be king.
Mm-hmm.
So that's his conflict.
And this is something I brought up with Gray yesterday. Because when I did my first Obsidian Nights, and we were talking Tyrion 1, and Jon Arryn, for as good as the hand as he was, he did have his faults too, because he was the one who brought people like Mandon Moore and Janos Slint into court. Like, those guys owe their position to Jon Arryn. So for responsible as Jon Arryn was, and whatever potential Robert saw in him, that's what I say. Jon Arryn also had his particular lapses in judgment. The fact that he let two people like that get to the positions that he did, and the fact that even though he was supposed to be quote unquote in charge, he still allowed Robert to beggar the realm with all of his tourneys and feasts over the years. Like,
you're right.
He really couldn't keep him in check.
Yeah, Jon Arryn, like, looks good, sounds good on paper, but when you scratch beneath the surface, he actually didn't do a very good job. You're totally right about that. Poor judge of character. He was blind to the resentment that his wife was building up against him, which led to the downfall of his entire house, or is in the process of doing that. He also, he let all the things that happened under Robert go. And it took him friggin' 13 years to figure out that maybe, just maybe, Cersei's kids were Jaime's kids. Like,
yeah, that all these Baratheons have dark hair, and then all of a sudden here's 3 with blonde hair. Like, wait. It's like, I know Robert. I've seen Stannis. I've seen Renly. I knew their father.
A good
possibly knew their grandfather.
A good hand of the king would be plugged into intelligence and should know that those two are fucking around anyway, Jaime and Cersei. Like, that, before they even had any kids, like, that should have been known by somebody with real political power. So yeah, definitely Jon Arryn did a pretty bad job of managing Robert. Although, again, it's kind of, you putting Robert's failure on Jon Arryn to solve also. So there's a collective failure there. And even Tywin and whoever else was, like, Ned should have known that Robert was a poor choice for the throne. Like, everybody should have known that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Ned bailed out on that because he just wanted to go home. Don't you think? He's like, yeah, Robert probably wasn't the best choice for king, but he didn't trust Tywin. And so he wanted to go home. So, because Probably would have made a better king than Robert. At least he would have taken it seriously.
Yeah, but Ned's like, Ned made it all the way, like he made it all the way down to Dorne. That's where his sister died. So it's like, you're from the north, you're in Dorne, you're as far away from home as you can possibly be, fighting this war for your best friend. And then to come back, and then you find that you have, again, we're going back to Ned, like you're carting back your nephew, and on your way back, you see the sacking of King's Landing, you see the carnage, the rape, the pillaging, the looting, and then you see the dead bodies of these children laid at the feet of your best friend, and he's smiling about it and glorifying the man who made the orders. Because
so I think that
Tywin can say whatever he wants, but and at least that, like, Tywin's hypocrisy of, like, because Tywin is the one to say, like, a good general should know what their men's up to, yet at the same time he says, I never ordered the Mountain to do anything, I never ordered Amory Lorch to do anything. It's like, bullshit. You pulled the order, you knew exactly what they were up to. And if it really were true that the Mountain and Amory Lorch went outside of orders and did what they did without any say from you, then it's on you to rectify that situation.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with all that. And the Lannisters, the Lannisters are an interesting crowd to assess too. So let's tackle them next after I thank Lambre S for this super chat. Oh, it's a big one. We're going to have to create something interesting here. Hang on now. Let me know if that's too loud. I feel like that's kind of loud, but the first time I did it, it didn't come through the mic frame much. I was surprised at how quiet it was. So in any case, thank you. If you would like to activate the super chat theremin, you can do it with a super chat through YouTube or the PayPal.me mythical astronomy link. So let's talk about some Lannisters. Tyrion Lannister, what does he want? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. He wants approval, and he wants to prove himself worthy. So just like Jon is a bastard, Tyrion he's short and he's got a stunted leg. So he's the dwarf and the half man and all these other names, and nobody puts that shame on him more than Tywin. So Tyrion is, Cersei points it out, like, oh, you're looking for love, and that makes you weak and vulnerable. Well, not always, but the way that Tyrion is so desperate for approval and love does, in fact, leave him vulnerable. And like many other people, he's also wants to prove himself worthy because people think he's unworthy. Opposing those desires are Tyrion's own pride, cruelty, and bitterness, essentially. He's extremely bitter about, again, the way that Tywin's treated him and the way the world sees dwarves. He has picked up a lot of cruelty and pride from his father, as have all the Lannister children. And these are the things that lead him down a dark path, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like for Tyrion, like he wants approval, he wants love, he wants to be loved for who he is, and he wants like true that unrequited love that he first experienced with Tysha. And because Tyrion's lacked that his entire life, his mother died giving birth to him, so he never experienced that. And I wonder, like, part of me thinks, like, if Joanna had lived through Tyrion's birth, if she would have been acting towards him the way Tywin did, or if she had lived, if Tywin still probably would have felt dismay and embarrassment that he has a dwarf for a son, but he might not have been as hard on him if Joanna had lived.
Yeah, much is made about how I'm putting on my smoking glasses here. I smoked my eyes. One too many shades of red here. So I agree with you 100%. The what if Joanna Lannister is an interesting question. Tywin, any last bit of humanity or joy seems to have gone out when that happened. And then, of course, Tywin blames Tyrion for her death. So, yes, that was a dark turn for everyone. When she died, she seems to have been the only redeeming character. However, as Grizzly Meadows points out, we don't necessarily know that she's a saint. She married Tywin. Was that post Reigns of Castamere? So there is that. Yeah, I believe it was, but we don't really know a whole lot about Joanna except for the way that Jaime and Cersei think about her, really, and what's said of Tywin, again, sort of losing his joy or humor, if he had any. So Tywin, did we talk about Tywin specifically himself?
No, not yet.
He's obviously motivated by this desire this idea of family pride. That's everything for him. He's obsessive about it. It's shaped by his father's dishonor. And so he's just gone really hard the other way. And then all of his experience with Aerys, where when Aerys was younger, Tywin really was a very functional and competent hand. And Aerys really did spit on him and make him an enemy. So there's some, not sympathy, but you can understand where Tywin, where some of his resentments come from. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that his desire to make his family name great is undercut by his own shortcomings because he's such a lousy parent. Much as piggybacking on the Doran Martell conversation, he's using his children as political pawns and not really addressing their humanity very much because he's burned out so much of his own humanity. And this leads to the collapse of his family, which undercuts his family pride. And of course, he's a lion. So all the Lannisters have themes of pride and honor and things like that, and trying to figure out what that means. So yeah, we'll mention Kevin too, since somebody did, but go ahead. What are your thoughts on Tywin?
Well, Tywin's like, what's intriguing about Tywin is that his driving motivation was his father. He has this mentality of never again. Like, we're never going to be this weak. We're never going to be at a point this low. We're never going to be laughed at. Like, everything he built was in trying to reclaim a lost glory that the Lannisters had that suffered under Tytos. But by doing that, Tywin actually leaves the Lannisters in a more vulnerable position they've ever been in, because in order to get to that, because of the way he went about building that strength, of getting to that point, because he did it through fear. He did it the exact opposite of the way someone like Daeron the Good would by maintaining alliances, or the way that Ned would. Like, Tywin's whole regime is built on fear and subjugation. Well, when the problem with that is when you're the one strong man and you die and there's no strong men left, like, well, everyone that you stepped on along the way, if you didn't kill them, well, now it's the time for them to stand back up and gun for what's left. And that's now the situation that Jaime and Cersei are in.
Correct. And Amira also with a great point here, that underneath of all of Tywin's sort of hardness and burning out his humanity is the fact that he is motivated by fear. He's so afraid of being laughed at that he does these hideous things to prove how hard he is. And it's John Conn piggybacks on this conversation as well. John Conn is motivated by his failure in the Battle of the Bells, and then the slandering of his name as everyone believes that he dies an alcoholic over, in Essos or whatever. So he's motivated by all this bitterness and embarrassment, and he is afraid of being laughed at. Now with Tywin, it's even more clear. And again, this is the other side of the coin of being a prideful lion. It's like, well, mockery, that's one thing they can't stand. And not all the Lannisters have problems with that. We'll talk about Jaime in a second, his relationship to mockery. But yes, that's a very good point, Amira. He is motivated by fear, and that is causing him to do some awful things. Theon does some of that stuff too as well. So good point.
And when we think like these lion analogies, one thing that you can't expect like male lions to do is kill the younger males so that there are no competition. Now, Tywin's not at the point where he's killing his own family members yet, but we do see like the relationship that he has with his brothers. Now, Kevin becomes his right-hand man, but the other two, like Jirian, decides just not to play the game at all. And the other one, I always blank on his name. The one who's like really forgettable.
Who are you talking about?
Tywin's younger brothers. There's Kevin, there's Jerian, and there's one other.
Oh, like there's Damon, I think, isn't it?
No, I think it's like Tybold or something.
Oh,
it's,
yeah.
It's another time. He's very forgettable, but the point is that that's the one who tried to be like Tywin, but lived so much in his shadow that he never got his own recognition. But it stands. What I'm trying to say is like Tywin, from the get-go, when he becomes Lord of Casterly Rock, like he starts by like even though he keeps Kevin in the loop, like he kind of pushes his other two brothers away, and then he goes on, and then as he goes on, like his children, he sees more as an extension of himself rather than their own people with agency, and just as a means of political tools, which is something that we already talked about, like with Doran Martell. Doran Martell hates Tywin, yet he has so much similarities with them. Tyget, thank you.
So, Kevin Lannister, we get one POV chapter from him at the end of the book, and it's pretty clear that like what he actually wants is pretty simple. He just really wants to be a good dad. He wants to provide opportunity for his son, and that's really what he's concerned with, Lancel and his little bit of the kingdom. He doesn't really want to be Cersei's hand and manage Cersei's shit, and he reluctantly takes the hand shipped afterwards to help clean things up. But he's really more concerned with his own family's legacy, which is a pretty Lannister-like thing, except for that he's not as hell-bent on defending the entire Lannister name because he's not the firstborn or whatever. He's mostly concerned about his own family. So, unfortunately, he hitched his wagon to Tywin, and he never questioned Tywin throughout the whole thing. And Tywin's committed many atrocities. So, ultimately, he is a victim of the game of politics in King's Landing, because you can't just walk away from a game like that after being so intimately tied up to it for so long. So he's also working against him is Cersei and Cersei's religious fanaticism. That's what's kind of messing up his plans for Lancel and making him the new Lord of Derry by marrying him to Gatehouse Amy. Yeah. So
one of Kevin's problems is that he was kind of Tywin's face of diplomacy in the times where Tywin would say, I at least tried to use because in the times where Tywin didn't just immediately burn everything to the ground, Kevin would be the one that he would send in to kind of do the talks. But if Kevin's talks broke down, Tywin would then be like, oh, well, I tried, burn it to the ground. And that was what Kevin's use was for him.
Ooh, got a good rip on the vape. Sorry there, buddy. In any case, so that's most of the Lannisters, except for, the two best ones, Jaime and Cersei. So let's talk about. They have a couple things in common and a couple ways that they're very different. Both Cersei and Jaime have a desire for self-determination. That's a common one in feudal society because very few people, not many people get the choice to do what they really want to do. So for Cersei in particular, she really is bitter about the fact that her gender is limiting her options. She wants power. That's very clear. She wants power. She's narcissistic and prideful to the extreme. There's no question about that. But she is so bitter about the patriarchy and the limitations that this ends up undercutting her ability to do what she wants, which is to have self-determination. And I just put grandeur as a sort of shorthand for she wants to be a glorious queen, which fine. Okay. It's a medieval society. She's the daughter of Tywin Lannister. Like it's reasonable for her to want that. But she, undercutting her success, much like Tywin, are her own shortcomings, her cruelty and her obsessiveness. So for example, we know that Cersei is a bad character because at the end, a bad person, quote unquote, at the age of 11, she pushed her friend down a fucking well
Mhm.
because her friend confessed to having a crush on her brother by asking Maggie the Frog, "Will I get to marry Jaime?" That's why Cersei pushed her down a well, because Cersei already was having those thoughts like, oh, me and Jaime are the only ones for each other. So now her best friend gets pushed down a friggin' well. Like, that's so she's so obsessed over getting what she wants that she is willing to be extremely cruel. She's obsessive and she's cruel. And this ultimately is a hindrance to her. So her narcissist, she's a very self-destructive character. All of her opposition is like basically her own character traits, besides the fact that, you know, the patriarchy restricting, you know, the opportunities of women is a justifiable thing to have a grudge about. However, the way that she deals with it versus, say, Brienne of Tarth or any of the other female characters is very unique. So go ahead on Cersei, and then we'll bring it back to Jaime. Cleo, stop it, girl.
Well, the thing with Cersei is she can have, like, as justifiable as it is to say, like, well, you know, the patriarchy is holding me down. At the same time, Cersei is not as smart as she thinks she is. So even if that weren't a factor in preventing her from getting the type of power that she wants, it still doesn't change the fact that she's not the type of person who should have that power to begin with.
Yeah, Minty's raising the question, which is essentially the question of Song of Ice and Fire. It's just, what do you do with power when you have it? Are you just trying to hold on to it because it's what you want, or are you trying to use your power to create a better world in some way? Like, even Renly had some desire to rule over a happy kingdom. Like, but most of these characters really are using this power for extremely selfish reasons. And with Renly, obviously, there's some selfish and vanity there too, as well. But this is what I'm going to talk a lot about that in the Dany essay. So I don't want to dive back into that. But the question of how people use power and what is just use of power is, I think, the central theme of the entire story. Yeah, like I said, I'll talk a whole bunch about that with Dany's arc, because Dany's arc is she's got more power than anyone by having the dragon. She has a unique form of magical power that is essentially unrivaled. So it's a very important question for Dany. So Jaime, getting back to Jaime, his desire also is for self-determination, in the sense that he was not only the firstborn son and having all the expectations of dad, well, then he got put in Aerys' Kingsguard. And so now his choices are heavily restricted. He took that offer because really very few people decline the offer to join the Kingsguard. It's such an honor. But he also didn't understand fully what it was, because he was only 15 and his head was filled with a sort of childish ideas about Arthur Dayne and glorious knights and all that. Even though Arthur Dayne enabled the worst of King Aerys' deeds along with all those other Kingsguard, and therefore is not a moral character, but that's a separate topic. So Jaime, he has a desire for self-determination that he's never really been because he hasn't had the ability to ever determine himself up until recently in the story. And that's why you can see him becoming empowered when he decides to go back for Brienne to save her at the bear pit, or decides to defy his father and stay on the Kingsguard and try to do justice. Like, these are empowering choices for Jaime because he's standing up for himself and determining his own fate. And that's a hard thing to do. And again, Jaime, since he's been 15, has just been a glorified doorman for Aerys and then Robert. Or yeah, I guess not Aerys, mostly Robert. Well, both, obviously, but
yeah. And there's also the fact that, like, Jaime kind of threw everything away to be close to Cersei.
Correct. So he's also constrained by that. He's under Cersei's control and Tywin's control, as well as the control of the White Cloak. So yeah, all those things, he ends up pretty bound.
Because one thing that happens is when Jaime is offered the position of Kingsguard by Aerys, and and he sees this as like, okay, this should be a reward, and only later he learns as a punishment. There also is prodding from Cersei to take that, because Cersei's still under the idea that she's going to marry Rhaegar, and that this is the way to keep, well, like that to, if we're going to stay close, then you need to become a Kingsguard, because if I marry Rhaegar, then I'm going to be King's Landing, and you're going to be here in Castle Rock. But then when Aerys
Cersei's basically using Jaime, not thinking about what Jaime wants at all, but just using him to serve her own story, which is incredibly, again, narcissistic and selfish of Cersei, isn't it?
Yeah, and what ends up happening,
Jaime doesn't perceive that.
Yeah, and they end up getting separated anyway, because when Aerys rebuffs Tywin and does not say that, you know, that Cersei and Rhaegar would be a good marriage match, then it just goes the other way. Now Jaime's the one going to King's Landing, and Cersei's the one back in Castle Rock.
Yeah. So yeah,
and it's too late to go back on that, because he's already accepted the position of Kingsguard. So he essentially
felt tricked, or like
the ink dried on that one.
Yeah. So see, the other thing then if you take away, there's that component of, but what does Jaime want? Like, if he didn't have to join the Kingsguard, what does Jaime really want? What's fulfilling for Jaime? Well, Jaime struggles with cynicism. He's a pretty perceptive character, and he's learned a lot by being a pawn. Essentially, he's learned how much bullshit everyone is full of. And that's why he has that sarcastic wit that's a lot like Tyrion's, where he's constantly making fun of things and talking about how empty everything is and how meaningless all the things that people think are meaningful actually are meaningless. The gods, they're not real. These traditions are bullshit. The White Cloak is bullshit. And he's mostly right about most of that stuff. Like, him and Sandor essentially have a similar view of a lot of this stuff. But the thing about Jaime is that where Sandor is repulsed by all that shit, you know, the High Lord shit, Jaime sort of participates in it, but in a way that's like kind of disconnected. Like, he knows it's bullshit, and he just sort of like floats around in that world, and he not even like, that's why he doesn't seem like he really cares about anything, because he's not really connected to all the stuff that he's doing. So I think that what Jaime really wants is to just kind of be a fuck off. Like, he doesn't really want to be a serious person. A lot like Robert. Like, he really just, he likes sword fighting, and, you know, he's essentially searching for something meaningful in the world and hasn't found it yet. And because he sees through a lot of the bullshit in the world, it's hard for him to sort of really find anything meaningful. He's been tricked by a lot of people, and that's why I say he's dealing with cynicism and disillusionment. So if the flip side of that is that what would be fulfilling for Jaime is to find something real. He tries to do that recently with the Kingsguard by attempting to make the Kingsguard actually honorable, and trying to do justice. He thinks about, maybe I can raise Tommen better than Joffrey. So he's sort of planting his flag here, and he's like, well, here's where I am. I'm going to start. I think that what might feel real to me is to actually do justice, because I haven't done that basically my whole life. I've been fucking off. So he's beginning to find something meaningful. I think he's been inspired by Brienne a lot. There's no question about that. But ultimately, I think where this is going, Grey Waste Tim, is that when Jaime's going to have an opportunity to fight the others. So there's nothing more meaningful than that. So even somebody who's cynical and thinks that most things are bullshit and don't matter, once the long night falls, now here's a cause that's actually worth committing to. And I think that will be meaningful for Jaime.
Yep. And I think like what George is trying to get across with Jaime, when Jaime says he's going to do justice, is that it's different in the way from when Tyrion says he's going to do justice. Because Tyrion, when he first gets to King's Landing with the note from Tywin, he himself says that he's going to do justice. But does he? Now, he gets one over on Janos Slynt, but at the same time, Tyrion is still propping up Joffrey. He's still propping up Cersei, because he's also looking for that love and that acceptance. So he's still propping up a regime that he knows is terrible by keeping Joffrey on the throne.
Yeah, he's
So
after the worthiness thing there. He's trying to prove his capability, how smart he is, how competent he is, because people don't think he is competent.
yeah, whereas so Tyrion's idea of serving justice is still something that's also self-preserving and self-serving, whereas Jaime's idea of actually dispensing justice actually would be true justice, because now by taking off the shackles of Cersei, by no longer having Tywin on him, and by recognizing like the ideals of what I thought the Kingsguard were bullshit, but I can't change what I was in the past, and I can't change the Kingsguards that came before me, but I can try and reshape and alter it for the future. As Jaime's at a point where he sees like there's like the only way to fix a problem is to first recognize that there's a problem, and that's what Jaime's actually doing, and that's where his growth comes in. He admits there's a problem. I actually do want to now put in the effort and the work to actually fix it.
And also simply the act of standing up to his father and refusing to be a pawn is kind of a first for him as well. So yeah, that is growth. And you can see how all this growth is related to this core conflict of both wanting self-determination and wanting to find a cause that is worthy. Because all of the things that kind of like Sansa, like Jaime grew up thinking all these knights were paragons of virtue and the Kingsguard knights were great. And now he's like, the white cloak is the thing that soiled me. That's what he says. And that is true in a certain way. So he's very disillusioned and so, yes, would find fulfillment if he can find a cause that actually is worthy. So that's a good discussion of Jaime and Cersei. And let's talk about Theon, also known as Reek, also known as the Prince of Winterfell, the Turncloak, and a ghost in Winterfell. Lady Barbary says that Theon wants to be a Stark, and what that really means is that Theon wants acceptance. He lost his family at an early age, and being a Stark means essentially he just wants to be accepted by the Starks because that's who he knows. When he tries to go back to Ironborn culture and find acceptance there, it's just too freaking piratey for him. He's not a goddamn pirate. He hasn't been raised as a pirate, and he's just not a pirate. They call him a soft Greenlander, but basically the Ironborn are the ones who are kind of on the extreme end of, lifestyles and culture, right? They're a very warlike, austere, barbarian culture. Almost like a stereotype of what people think Vikings were, but not, it's a slightly unrealistic or whatever. That's a separate conversation. But point is, Theon does not fit in Ironborn culture through no fault of his own. He was a political prisoner, and has been all his meaningful years he raised with the Starks. So from that, he has a desire to be accepted and to be seen as worthy. But warring against that are a lot of personal emotions. So he has a pride that comes from feeling inferior, a little bit like Tywin, not being laughed at, but just the fact that like he's kind of a glorified hostage. So he has to take his pride where he can. And he probably just has an inclination towards that to begin with. He is good looking and charming, and he's good with the arrow. So simply being good at stuff is enough to breed pride as a character trait. But he definitely has a lot of pride, and that is a stumbling block for him. He's very insecure, of course, because of his, he doesn't know who he is, and he's an Ironborn, a fish out of water or whatever, squid out of water. He has self-esteem issues, feelings of abandonment. But the main thing is the culture clash. Like Ironborn culture is just so weird and extreme, and he was not able to assimilate into it when he went back to it, and he was essentially ground up by that meat grinder. So there's a tragic tale underneath of he comes off as such a dick at first, and he is. So he's very hateable at first, but the reason why he's become an interesting character is because all that pride was broken so emphatically, more than anyone else, and because we learned the backstory of, and we're like, oh, it's not his fucking fault that he was, made a hostage and given away by his, was given to the Starks essentially. So full of tragedy. But George loves taking characters that have been broken down and repurposing them. So as Theon goes forward, how do you think these desires are going to affect his decisions and what he does in the future?
I think what Theon wants to do is he wants to see Asha take the Sea Stone chair, but he may be forced into a position where he has to be that one Iron, where I'm blanking on their names, but they're the perfect parallel. Bad brother. That Euron is bad brother, and that Theon the latecomer,
right?
That he has to take the Sea Stone chair for himself because it is true. Like Theon was not there to throw his name in the hat for the King's Moot. He never had an opportunity. That's to say, like, if he had been there, like his chances probably weren't the greatest. But the fact that he was denied the opportunity to even do so
creates the loophole for getting rid of Euron, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also, and we'll just talk about Asha at the same time, or Asha, I should say. I think the way to resolve some of the tension with even Asha, who is inculcated in Ironborn culture, sees the problems with Ironborn culture. And that's what makes the King's Moot chapter so great, is all the politics and the open discussion of how a whole entire culture should go. Should we shift our way of life or cling to our old way of life and double down? It's such an interesting conversation. And Asha is the one who really should have won that moot. She had the best plan. She was talking the most sense. She was going against. It's like, even though she made her father very proud, she also saw the flaws in her father's ways and wanted to change the Ironborn and bring them into the modern world, really, I guess you could say. So I think that both Theon and Asha could find a satisfying end should they team up in any way, whether it's King Theon with Asha as the real power or whatever, bringing some sort of change to Ironborn culture, if that's fucking possible. So
I mean, it's not impossible, because when the Ironborn have only gone back to the old way since Balon, but because before then, Balon's father, Quentyn, however you pronounce it, Catelyn Greyjoy, he's the one who kind of tried to get them to be more like mainland Westeros.
True.
So
and
really,
a lot of people cheered for Asha at the moot, so there's definitely divided feelings. Yeah,
because a lot of Balon's rule was a rejection of his father's rule and trying to bring them back to the old way. But that also was spurned on by his brothers, like, because Victarion, dumb as a stump as he is, he was a supporter of the old way, and Aeron Damphair is a fanatic and definitely wants to go back, definitely wanted the old way. Euron, the old way the old way just works for him. It's not to say that he necessarily, I mean, he probably does want that but only because it's the easiest means of achieving his ends, and it's because of Balon really taking them back to the old way that Euron was able to stand such a chance.
And Euron is actually doing something different too, because the old way is really just reaving from their strongholds. Euron is having them conquer. He's trying to take the throne of Westeros. So he's actually mobilizing the Ironborn into a fighting force and an army of conquest, which is not typically what they've done. They have fought over a few islands with the Reach and the Starks, but really they stick to the islands. We see that discussion with Asha trying to take, Deepwood Mod and Theon trying to take Winterfell. It's like, that's not what we do,
Yeah. One of the things I do like with Asha, though, is with her connections, is she's also the one that gives us into the insight of Roderick the Reader, which just shows to show like the Ironborn do have their outliers and we see that with Roderick and House Harlaw, because Roderick is the one to call Euron out on his bullshit when Euron says like, well, I'm the only one to go back to Valyria and live. And then Roderick's like, did you? And then Euron just kind of has that shut up, like really calling him out, like, did you? I've been to Valyria, like, really now? Where's your proof? And that's why I love that also, because Roderick is the reader, because Roderick is us. He's the one asking that question, because that's the question we all would want to ask about Euron. Like, were you really in Valyria? Because I would really love to know what's there if you can tell me.
Yep. So, right, yeah, there are seeds of a change there. There are definitely some foundations you could build something different on. And so that there's a couple of other Greyjoys floating around. So let's talk about them. With Aeron, so Aeron's desires, he's kind of a kooky character, so you have to think about this for a second. He wants to serve God in his conceptualization of God. Obviously, that's part of his equation, but he also cares for the Ironborn. He has a very specific way that he thinks the Ironborn should live, but he really does care about his countrymen. He is not doing what he's doing for glory. He's just a little crazy. I think that's really what it's about. He's really is kind of crazy. But we see the moves that he makes, like he's concerned about Euron's effect on the Ironborn. And I think that does reflect a certain amount of what his desires are. Like he has a desire to see the Ironborn flourish in his specific way, as well as just sort of being holy or whatever, and being crazy out there in the waves, doing his thing. Now, his oppositional forces would be his religious and social inflexibility, and also his trauma. He was raped by Euron, so he's dealing with a lot of trauma and fear, and he's taken to a fanatic's lifestyle, potentially as his way of dealing with some of that. So first he became a total drunk and someone who didn't take anything seriously, and then he had this transformational experience and became a religious fanatic. So all of those things, very extreme behaviors. That's been his pattern. Another oppositional force for Aeron is he's being force-fed Shade of the Evening by his brother. So that sucks. And he might be about to be sacrificed. So there's a lot of things opposing Aeron's desire to be holy and to care for the Ironborn. But if he is not killed in the battle, he is a character that could come around and be a part of some sort of different movement for the Ironborn culture. Like, he is fond of Asha, even though he's sexist and he thinks a woman can't rule. He potentially could be pro Asha and Theon, especially if they emerge as the oppositional force to Euron. So we'll have to see if he survives the battle and gets a chance to continue caring for the Ironborn. But those are my thoughts on Aeron.
Yeah, I think Aeron he's redeemable in that if he lives long enough to have a turnaround. Not to say that he's going to become like religiously tolerant, but at least enough to see that he needs to be more flexible if the Ironborn are to survive and continue on as a culture. That
he might need to accept, like, the reason why I put that inflexibility is that, again, I think Asha was the best candidate. And if he had thrown his force behind Asha, maybe that would have made a difference. But instead, he was all Victarion. And Victarion wasn't really a good ruler. He was just...
It's just because Victarion was as close to Balon as they were going to get. And that's because that's really who Damp Arrow would be championing, would be Balon.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. Because what he said, more of what Balon gave you, essentially. Only He's probably even less clever. Then there's Victarion. Speaking of less clever, like I was saying, his desire is to be a bloody pirate, which you could say as being great in the context of his culture. He's got a little Robert Baratheon in him, except for that he's also dealing with this wounded pride from, this whole incident, which is horrible. I don't even want to go into it, but something having to do with his first wife and Euron defiling her, and then Victarion beating her to death or something like that. And it's really awful tale. but it's one of the things that's tormented Victarion. And he, he's essentially very much a product of this meathead Ironborn culture. And so he's prey to all of its toxicity, essentially. And then his other main oppositional force is just simply Euron.
For me with Victarion is once he has his goals, but now we can't even say for sure if he
Victarion, he wants to open a pizza parlor, of course. So thank you, Micah Hall. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, we're not even sure now that Victarion's because we had discussed this in our last stream when Vic came up, when his chapters shift from the first person perspective to the third person. Now that he's been fire whited and got that firearm, are his desires that he might have, are they still his own, or are they now Makoro's desires? Is that the aims that he's now working towards?
Yeah, he's kind of a tool, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, he might still. That's not to say like it's something I really. It's one of the things I'm most interested in reading in Wins is seeing just exactly how much agency Vic has left of his own. Is he a total tool Makoro? Is it kind of half and half? Is who like basically who's driving this car right now? Really, that's the answer I want to get.
No, I don't. I think it's definitely still Victarion. I just think he's easily manipulatable because he's kind of dumb.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, "Don't tell me I can't sail across the grass sea. I'll kill you." It's like, okay, bro. No. Says first chapter actually named Victarion is right after he's healed by Makoro. He was freed from Euron's grasp. Oh, that's interesting.
Ooh.
Yeah, because he does go through. He's called Iron Captain, the Reaver, and the Iron Suitor. And then finally becomes Victarion. Oh, that's interesting. No. One of the things I did want to discuss was what George might be doing by naming some of the chapters descriptions instead of their name. So yeah, that's interesting. That's a good observation. That deserves a little theremin.
Victarion wants us to kill Euron and blow the horn. And that's the thing too, is like, Vic, you know what the horn is going to do. You've seen what it done. You saw that guy's lungs burn out. Yet he's still just like, I want to put my lips around it and give it a toot. As if he seems to think like, well, it's not going to happen to me, which is a lot. It's almost. I don't want to compare Vic to Rhaegar, but sometimes these characters have these ideas of, I saw what happened the last time, but it's not going to happen to me. And Rhaegar's a character who had that, and Aegon's a character. Aegon the Fifth, he's a character who had that, of like the idea of, I've seen what I'm trying to do. I've seen what it's done in the past, the ones who came before me, but this time it's going to be different because I'm the one doing it.
So since you mentioned Rhaegar, let's talk about Rhaegar and Melisandre. They have similar problems. So Rhaegar, his desire is nothing less than to save the world. And you might add to be the one doing it, because anybody that is capable of seeing themselves as the chosen one probably enjoys the idea of being the chosen one on some level. But it's hard to know. We don't really get much of an insight into Rhaegar's personality, but we do know that he's basically motivated by prophecy. At least I think that's clear. So it seems that he was trying to figure out this whole shit about Azor Ahai Reborn, which means he was concerned with the threat of the others. That's why I say he was trying to save the world. He was trying to play the role that he thought fate had decreed for him. First, he thought he might be the chosen one. Then, oh, it's my son. The thing is, he's close to the truth. This wasn't just a raw delusion. It turned out to be his sister and his other son, right? So he's close. Like the timing is almost there. And so basically, Rhaegar's desire is to discern prophecy, but his oppositional forces are the fact that prophecy is hard. It's fraught with peril. So he's trying to do something very difficult, and he's close but not quite, essentially, in his interpretations. And also, I think some of the tragedy of the circumstances of his birth affected his choices as well. I'm not certain it was in Rhaegar to be happy, Barristan Selmy says. Your thoughts on Rhaegar, Tim?
Where do I start with Rhaegar?
Prophecy is hard. Yeah.
Prophecies. See, Rhaegar, I really want to know what he found that made him have that total 180 to have him go out into the yard and say, I must be a warrior now. And to also like what made him change his perspective of it after that to think, okay, it's not me, it's my son. It's like, okay, well, how are you, like, because it's so unclear what he's reading, where he's getting the ideas from. It's like, well, what is your thought process on this? The great mystery, because we're never going to know because he's dead when the story starts.
Well, I think we will find out a little bit about what he's thinking, because all of his thinking was based on reading certain stuff that we just haven't gotten to read yet.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody like Marwyn or Tyrion may have read some of that stuff. Obviously, Quaithe may have read some of that stuff. So that same knowledge should resurface. It's kind of conspicuous by its absence, really. Like, well, what was Rhaegar reading that he thought he was Azor Ahai? And then his son. Yes, that's a very good question. It's this question with an answer, I have to think. And he's, I think a lot of it probably had to do with astronomy, because obviously he thought the red comet or at least not the red comet, but a comet that was seen around the time of Aegon's conception or birth, I forget which, was a big clue about it. And he thought the bleeding star was a comet. So obviously he was working on the Azor Ahai reborn prophecy, and he was thinking about celestial bodies. So the timing may have been based on astronomical cycles or other signs that he was looking for, eclipses, comets, things like that. So yeah, we'll just have to see. Ed Bloodraven may very well know, probably does know what Rhaegar was looking at and thinking. So that knowledge could also come from him as well.
Yeah.
Good point.
So the thing with Rhaegar, though, is Rhaegar does show that the fault of the trope of being the chosen one or fallen is that when Rhaegar leaves for the Trident and he has that conversation with Jaime, like because Jaime remembers seeing Rhaegar off and how Rhaegar tells him, like, when I get back, there's going to be changes, essentially. It seems like Rhaegar never even entertained the idea that he might lose this. Like, the idea that I'm never coming back didn't even seem to dawn on him. It just seemed natural, like, I'm the chosen one, or my son's the chosen one. So obviously I'm going to win. That Robert Baratheon can't be the one to come out on top. And yet that's exactly what happened. So it's like George takes that trope of the chosen one and just smashes it. It's like, well, the hero's dead. Here's the piece, and we're left to pick up the pieces, and let's build our story off of that. Because even though the hero is dead, the chosen one is dead, there's still the people around him that are left. And now this is their story, and it's up to them to continue on of what happens after that. And
I was muted.
And
I was just saying thanks. So sometimes with birds, you have to do wardrobe changes midstream. Thanks, Cleo, who's climbing over the camera right now. Yes.
And the thing is like Rhaegar, up until he allowed himself to be consumed by this prophecy, like he almost had it, because even with Varys undermining him at the tourney at Harrenhal, because Varys being probably more than likely being the one that led Aerys to show up, it still kind of played in Rhaegar's favor, because at that point Aerys hadn't left the Red Keep in years. So it actually could have done Rhaegar more favors for the people now to see Aerys and to see just what he had become with the matted hair and the beard and the nails, and for people to see that and be like, that's our king, and then look at Rhaegar shining and beautiful and be like, well, of course that guy should be king. We got to get rid of that one. but Rhaegar threw it away over prophecy because like it's like you had it, and you were almost there, but then you became more induced with this prophecy than actually seeing the goal through.
So, yes. First of all, yes. It's very much like Quentyn Martell. Rhaegar's story is like a failed chosen one story. So yeah, I think you've contextualized that very well. Mike Hall makes the point that just like the king takes the shit and the hand wipes, Cleo takes the shit and Elamel is the wife. So I guess I'm Cleo's hand. And actually, truth be told, if I could just share my screen here with my notes, I'll give you a little behind the scenes. Wait a minute, what's this? There's a section for Cleo. Cleo's desires are to join the party, to run David's life, and to get in the naughty drawer. And the oppositional forces are David having a life, Goose, and the naughty drawer being closed, which is really a bitch. So that's Cleo's conflict of the heart. Yes. What about you, Tim? What's your cat's struggle?
David's he's actually being really good. He's over on the nightstand. He was sleeping for most of this, but yeah, here he is.
So the cat's desire is to sleep, and his struggle is humans wanting to interact with the cat.
Mostly his desires are to get wherever his crinkle ball went, but I think today he's just being lazy.
Ball. Okay. So oppositional forces would be the crinkle ball being lost or getting over crinkled and worn out, perhaps.
You're actually being really good at surprising. I honestly did not expect him to be this well. I figured he'd be tearing at the headphones and the microphone cords the entire time, but nah, he's been real quiet.
Maybe your cat desires to see you succeed, Greyways, Tim, so that there's lots of money for cat treats and new crinkle balls. All right, so Melisandre is similar to Rhaegar. She's also trying to save the world and interpret prophecy. That's why I compared them. Melisandre has an additional issue, though. She is struggling with losing her humanity. She's undergoing a fire transformation, as I've elaborated on in my Melisandre series. She doesn't need to eat or sleep anymore. She's slowly becoming some sort of a being who's sustained by fire magic, and she's on board with committing human sacrifice if that's what it takes to fight the others and wake a dragon from stone or whatever it is. So she's kind of utilitarian in that sense, and she is losing her humanity, but she hasn't lost it completely. She is trying to save Davos's last son. She feels bad for Davos that he's lost his other sons. So she's not mean or vindictive, or I'm not vindictive. She's not like cruel or something. She's just sort of detached and sort of amoral. And she thinks rightly that the fate of the world is on the line. And so this sometimes will lead to people to suspend their normal morality, of course. So you could say that Melisandre, like Rhaegar, is also struggling with hubris, the hubris of believing that you have such a big role to play in saving the world can lead you to make mistakes. And Melisandre's mistakes do come from sort of a hubris point of view. So being overconfident in her interpretations when she should know better, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is, like George has said, that Melisandre is one of the most misunderstood characters and played into one of the reasons why he gave her the POV chapter that he did. And the thing is, like, Melisandre she really is a heretic to the order, because she's the one red priestess out there that's currently not championing Dany. And I mean, a good portion of that is because she's in Westeros and the rest of them are in Essos. But she is going in, and which actually kind of makes me think like what Thoros of Myr, what his standing would be if he knew about Dany too, if he would join the Dany bandwagon.
Well, Thoros was kind of a throwaway as far as the Red Temple was concerned. Like there's like, I'll just send this drunk guy to Westeros. Maybe Ares will like him. Ares like burning stuff. That was the idea. So What will Thoros think about Dany? That's hard to say. If he's around that long, I am more interested to see what Melisandre thinks about Dany and what the Red Temple thinks about Jon. Melisandre does seem like on the show, she's in a position to see that both Jon and Dany are part of the Azor High Reborn Dragonhead or whatever it is. So we'll see. I'm obviously very interested to see where Melisandre's story goes. Do you think that there's a chance that, like, mostly in the Melisandre Secrets series, I focused on magical foreshadowing, magical power that Melisandre might have. Do you think that she could regain or hold on to any of her humanity or find some of that at the end of the story? Or is she just going to keep going down that road of doing whatever it takes?
I think she's kind of at the point where I've come this far. I probably want to see it through. But the thing is like there's so little we can go on because we don't know how the complete machinations of how a fire white works. Even if she could revert, it could be completely accidental. Like maybe she might get humanity, but it's actually not what she wants, but because she missed a step in the process. Like we really don't know what actually becoming a full-fledged fire white entails. It seems like it's something that's never been done before. She probably would be the first, or at least the closest that they've come to it.
Well, just to be clear, I don't think she's becoming a fire white, but a fire other. A fire white would be like Beric. He was killed and resurrected. Melisandre shows no evidence of having died and having been resurrected. She seems to be doing a slow transformation, in my opinion, which I've termed as a fire other because there's not really a term for someone who is being sustained by R'hllor, but she describes, soon she hopes she doesn't need to sleep at all. And as it is now, she only dozes a little bit. Can you feed her some sticks from the tray or something? So I'm just curious to see if she'll continue this process of becoming a fully magical being, or if this idea is supposed to be important, that maybe she has just a little bit of humanity left, that at the end it'll be some act of kindness that she performs as opposed to just all this Machiavellian blood sacrifice shit. But we'll have to see. So I just got one or two characters left, and then we're going to wrap it up. We're almost to 3 hours here. And Barristan Selmy, he's a pretty simple dude. He desires to be honorable. He desires to be bold. He desires to be a good soldier. But his problem is that his idea of honor is kind of bullshit, and he's not very clever. So he doesn't always know who to serve. And he doesn't always have somebody to tell him what to do who's a just master. So without Dany to tell him what to do, he's kind of just making his own decisions. He's, formed an alliance with Shave Paper. We don't know that that's a good idea. So what do you think of Barristan and his decision making?
First, I think with Barristan is when he is dismissed by Joffrey, we're told that was kind of Varys' doing. And I think the original intent for Barristan was for him to be kind of pushed along to Fagon, but got lost along the way and ended up in Dany's court. And a lot of that has to do with Varys and Illyrio's planning not always going to fruition.
You're probably right about that.
And that's the problem. It's the same problem that Doran Martell is having, is when you have so many chess pieces on a chessboard this big, when your chessboard is the literal world, you can't always know that your pieces are going to go where you intend them to. And it seems like this is folly, that these guys seem to think that they have more control over their pieces than they actually do. And it's because they keep viewing them as pieces rather than people with agency. So Barristan, and the thing that's interesting about Barristan is that if he had gone to Fagon, I'm fully on the idea that Fagon's a Blackfire. Barristan, when we look at his history, Barristan slew Maelys the Monstrous. So he's the one who brought the 5th Blackfyre Rebellion to an end. If he were to end up with Fagon, then the man who ended the 5th Blackfyre Rebellion would actually then be unknowingly working towards furthering the 6th, which is like, and there's an irony in that.
That would be funny. I really hope he doesn't switch from Dany to Fagon, but I think you're right that is at least a lost plot thread, if not something that's going to happen. So that's cool. And then so we kind of talked about Jon Connington obliquely. Essentially, he desires to prove himself, to restore his name, and to honor Rhaegar to some extent. And the oppositional forces that he's got are his own bitterness at his past failure, his wounded pride, his unrequited love from Rhaegar, and also, the madness of encroaching grayscale. So lots of oppositional forces for Jon, and he's also very obsessive, and that obsessiveness is probably going to be part of his downfall as well. We sort of talked about him when we were talking about Tywin, though. And then Lyanna, I didn't mention Lyanna. I sort of did when we were talking about Arya. I think she's similar to Arya in that down deep, essentially what she runs on is joy and passion. She likes riding. She's got the wolf blood. She's, she's also one of the characters who likes to try to set things right. We know that from the Laughing Tree story. She intercedes when somebody's being bullied, and uses her Stark name and her riding skill to humble these 3 knights and try to bring some justice, to stand up for Howland. So much like Jon or Dany or other characters, she's somebody who tries to set things right. I didn't mention Sam. He's another one who tries to do that as well. We'll go back to Sam in a second. The oppositional forces for Lyanna are just realm politics. Her desire to just live a simple life or to live a happy life are essentially eaten by the turmoil of the realm. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. And Lyanna's opposition is she's in opposition to her own family because of Rickard Stark's trying to get in on these Southern ambitions.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, because you're right. Because I think she must have gotten swayed to Rhaegar's view of prophecy and seen the need for them to conceive a child. I don't think she just did that as a romance. I think Rhaegar would have convinced her of whatever he was doing and the importance of it. So, and the same for Elia, for that matter. I think Rhaegar was very persuasive, probably. He had his close circle of people on board with what he was doing. But let's talk about Sam. This may be the last character we need to talk about. His desires are really to be an intellectual, to learn, to read. He is an intellectual. He's pretty disconnected from his body, much like I am, really. He likes to think about stuff. That's what he thrives on. That's what makes him feel fulfilled. Unfortunately, his father he's not the sort of son Randyll Tarly wanted. Randyll Tarly wanted another violent killer. Sam is not that. So he, of course, is dealing with all of this insecurity and self-esteem that comes from his abuse and from the expectations of medieval patriarchy. However, Sam's basic values, like I said, he is someone who likes to try to set things right. He feels good when he can sort things out. He offers advice. He's pretty perceptive and offers advice when he thinks he can help somebody. And he's also a kind character. Like he sees the injustice with Gilly, for example, and he wants to do something about it. So he's a bleeding heart. He's somebody that's trying to save people, and I think that's important as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think Sam, one thing that Sam might find himself in opposition is when his father re-enters the picture, because I do think Randyll Tarly is one of these friends in the Reach.
Yeah,
that right. The Golden Company speaks of. So Sam might find himself in complete opposition to his father because of the side that Randyll decides to choose. That'll be his folly. It'll be interesting to see. Like, I'm not sure they did it in the show, but I'm actually not sure if Sam is going to have if their paths will cross again. Like, do you think that Sam will see his father again in the books, or is that?
I don't think
'Cause
so. I think
he's already
Randall's going to go down when Dany hits King's Landing. My question is, I don't know where Sam's arc is going to go. I think he's going to be escaping Old Town before Euron gets there with the help of Alaris the Sphinx, or else he'll be taken prisoner by Euron for a while before he finds his way to the wall again. But I don't really know. I mean, his plot now is really based on the others and all that stuff. So I don't think it'll tangle back with realm politics too much. And yeah, I don't think he'll see his father again. No, I don't think so.
To be, when you say like when he's, I would say maybe being taken captive by Euron seems actually more likely, because Euron, if he's trying to become a king, then something that he would want to have that we haven't seen him have is a maester. Like, doesn't seem like there's a maester on the Silence. And Sam would also be able the one to tell Euron about the others, which would be right up Euron's alley. Like, oh, like, ooh, that's something I want to know more about. Like, maybe I should head north towards the wall and see more of that.
Yeah, that's true. Euron does need to learn about the others, if any of the foreshadowing that I have found in the Night's King Crow's Eye video, means anything. So we will see. Cool, guys. Well, there was a couple other very minor bit characters that I had on here, but we don't need to talk about Merritt, Frey, or Pate, really. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. We're just shy of 3 hours. So thank you so much, Tim, for joining at the last minute. Do you have a link to your blog or something you want to share?
My Twitter, you can follow me at The Gray Waste. My essays are up on Reddit. You can follow my pin tweet with my essay, Phagon, a parallel of kings, princes, and pretenders. I will be on an upcoming episode of Obsidian Nights podcast with Gray Area, where we discuss Tyrion 1. And you can also check out the other stream that me and Dave did, The Secrets of the Crypts of Winterfell.
Very awesome. And I just grabbed the link to your essay and I'm dropping it in the chat. Boom. There it is. And I'll add it to the description as well. So thank you, Tim, for coming on. Thank you, chat. And this has been a very fun discussion. Had a great time. I'm probably going to take Wednesday off so I can keep working on this Dany video. But of course, I will see you next Sunday, if nothing else. Christmas is on what, Saturday?
Yes.
So I'm pretty sure I'll be streaming on Sunday. At least I think what I want to do is talk about some King of Winter mythology. So it'll be something fun and pretty light on next Sunday. But yeah, that's it, guys. I will see you soon. And like I said, I'm going to get right back to work on the Dany video. So look for that. I don't even want to say it's going to be a monster. So just got to keep working on it. All right, guys. Happy Sunday. See you next time.